Hello, friends. About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did. Also, don't forget to press the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. From which country or city do you follow the channel? I never thought I'd find myself alone in the Alaskan wilderness, watching shadows stretch across pristine waters as the sun dipped behind jagged mountains. My cabin, a sturdy but modest structure of weathered logs, sat perched on a small clearing overlooking Midnight Lake, so named for its unfathomable depths that seemed to swallow light itself. The name's Cascai, it means raven, in a language almost forgotten to time. My grandmother was Tlingit, and though I barely remember her face, her stories about the spirits of the forest lived within me. Perhaps that's what drove me here, to this remote outpost in Denali, where civilization was but a distant memory, and the wilderness stretched endlessly in all directions. Taking this park ranger position wasn't a decision made lightly. 3 years at a desk job in Anchorage had slowly suffocated something vital inside me. I needed space to breathe, to think. The posting was advertised as challenging and suitable only for experienced outdoorsmen. The pay was decent, but the real draw was the solitude. 6 months alone with nature, responsible for monitoring wildlife activity, assisting the occasional lost hiker, and maintaining the ecological balance of this pristine section of national parkland. The Department of Interior briefing had been succinct. Sector 17 is remote, even by Alaskan standards. Nearest ranger station is 42 miles southeast. Weekly radio check-ins mandatory. Emergency extraction available, but expect a minimum 6-hour response time in optimal conditions. What they didn't mention was the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a suburban night, but the profound, living silence of true wilderness. A silence occasionally broken by sounds that made your mind race with primitive fear. My first week passed uneventfully. I established routines, mapped the immediate area within a 5-mile radius of my cabin, and documented wildlife sightings. Moose, wolves, and bears were common enough, but maintained their distance. Nature has a way of respecting boundaries when they're properly established. It was during my second week when I found the tracks. I was checking the northern perimeter of my sector, an area dense with old-growth spruce and hemlock. The forest floor was covered in moss and decaying leaves, soft and usually unmarked except by smaller animals. But there they were, impressions in the soft earth that defied explanation. 18 inches long, humanoid in shape, 5 distinct toes, a stride pattern suggesting a height of over 7 feet. I'd tracked bears for years in my youth, guided by my uncle who taught me to read the forest like a book. These weren't bear tracks. Bears don't walk on 2 legs for extended distances, and their paw prints are unmistakable. These were different. I photographed them, measured them, and made plaster casts as protocol demanded. The official explanation would be simple. Unknown wildlife, possibly a large bear with deformed paws. But I knew better, and something cold settled in my stomach as I knelt beside those massive impressions. That night, as I sat by my radio logging the day's observations, I heard it for the first time. A long, low vocalization that seemed to reverberate through the trees. Not a wolf's howl or a bear's grunt. Something between a moan and a call, haunting in its almost human quality. I switched off my lamp and moved to the window, peering into the darkness. Moonlight silvered the lake's surface, but the tree line was a wall of impenetrable shadow. The sound came again, closer this time, and every instinct screamed at me to bolt the door, to hide. Instead, I grabbed my rifle and stepped onto the porch. The September air bit at my exposed skin, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else. A musky, organic odor that didn't belong to any animal I recognized. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. My voice sounded small against the vastness of the wilderness. No response came, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I scanned the tree line with my flashlight, its beam pathetically inadequate against the enormity of the darkness. Nothing moved except the branches swaying gently in the night breeze. I retreated inside, double-checking the locks. not that they would provide much protection against anything truly determined to enter. That night, sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by strange noises outside, snapping branches, shuffling movements around the cabin's perimeter, and once, what sounded like heavy breathing just outside my bedroom window. Morning brought no evidence of visitors, no tracks near the cabin, no disturbed equipment. I might have dismissed the night's events as imagination, a product of isolation and darkness, if not for the trees. 3 massive spruce at the forest edge were marked with deep gouges, far higher than a bear could reach standing on its hind legs. The bark was stripped away in places, revealing pale wood beneath. Something had been marking territory, my territory. As I stood examining the damaged trees, radio in hand, debating whether to report the incident, I noticed something hanging from a high branch, a half-eaten carcass of a deer, placed there deliberately, like an offering, or a warning. In that moment, I understood I wasn't alone in Sector 17. Something watched from the shadows, something that walked on 2 legs and could hoist a 150-pound deer 20 feet into a tree with apparent ease. The logical part of my brain cycled through explanations. Another ranger playing pranks, hunters trespassing on federal land, my own imagination distorting natural phenomena. But as I hurried back to the cabin, I couldn't shake the stories my grandmother had told. Tales of the Kushtaka, the land otter man of Tlingit legend, or the more widely known Sasquatch that haunted the forests of the Pacific Northwest. Creatures that existed in the liminal spaces between our world and something else, appearing only to those who ventured too far from the safety of civilization. I'd never given those stories much credence, viewing them as cultural metaphors rather than literal beings. But alone in the wilderness, with evidence I couldn't explain away, doubt crept in. That afternoon, I made my scheduled radio check-in with headquarters. Ranger Caskai reporting from Sector 17. All systems normal, I said, hesitating before adding. Request information on any unusual wildlife activity reported in this region over the past year. The response crackled through after a moment's delay. Copy that, Caskai. No significant anomalies in your sector's records. Typical bear and wolf activity only. Reason for inquiry? I glanced toward the window, at the forest beyond. Just being thorough. I've observed some unusual tracks. Probably nothing. Copy that. Maintain standard protocols and document anything unusual. Next check-in scheduled for Friday, 0900 hours. The radio fell silent, leaving me with my thoughts and the growing certainty that standard protocols wouldn't be sufficient for what lurked in these woods. That evening, I reviewed the Park Service manual section on wildlife encounters, finding nothing useful for my situation. The closest reference was a brief paragraph about unusual phenomena, directing rangers to document, photograph, and report without engaging. As darkness fell, I prepared for another night, this time with my rifle closer at hand and extra batteries for my flashlight. The isolation that had initially attracted me to this posting now felt oppressive, dangerous. I stepped onto the porch for one final check before locking down for the night. The lake was a perfect mirror, reflecting stars and the waxing moon. Beautiful but deceptive. Beneath that peaceful surface lurked pike large enough to drag down water birds, and depths that had never been properly sounded. Something moved at the far shore, a massive shadow detaching itself from the tree line. In the dim moonlight, I could make out only a vague silhouette, but its proportions were all wrong for a bear or moose. It stood upright, impossibly tall, watching the cabin, watching me. I raised my binoculars with trembling hands, but by the time I focused, the figure had melted back into the forest, leaving only swaying branches and disturbed water at the shoreline, as evidence it had been there at all. Sleep would not come easily that night, I knew. Something had found me in this wilderness, something that defied classification in my scientific understanding of the world. And I couldn't shake the feeling it was only a matter of time before curiosity drove it closer to my cabin door. The morning after my sighting brought heavy fog rolling off Midnight Lake, turning the familiar landscape into something dreamlike and uncertain. I'd managed perhaps 3 hours of restless sleep, jolting awake at every creak of the cabin's wooden frame or whisper of wind through the eaves. My first task was to check the perimeter. Armed with my service pistol and camera, I circled the cabin in ever-widening loops, searching for evidence that would either validate my fears or provide rational explanation for what I'd seen. The shoreline revealed what I both hoped and dreaded to find: tracks emerging from the water. The impressions were deeper than before, suggesting whatever made them had been carrying weight. They led directly toward the cabin, stopping about 30 yards from my bedroom window, where they abruptly turned and headed back to the lake. It had been watching me. I photographed everything meticulously, placing my government-issued boots beside the prints for scale. My size 12 footwear looked childlike in comparison. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, crouching to examine the stride pattern. The creature had an unusual gait, almost like it wasn't accustomed to walking on two legs for extended periods. Yet it was unmistakably bipedal. According to my training, unexplained phenomena required documentation and reporting, but caution warned against sharing too much too soon. My credibility was on the line. A single report of Bigfoot could end my career before it properly began. Instead, I decided to investigate further before my next check-in. If this was some unknown species, or worse, some twisted human living in the wild, I needed evidence beyond ambiguous footprints. That day, I set up 4 motion-activated trail cameras around the cabin and at key points near the shoreline. Standard procedure for tracking elusive wildlife, nothing that would raise eyebrows with headquarters. I also crafted a makeshift alarm system using fishing lines strung with small bells at intervals of 10 feet around the cabin's perimeter. As dusk approached, I found myself constantly checking and rechecking my equipment. Rifle cleaned and loaded, flashlights tested, satellite phone charged in case the radio failed. The rational part of my mind recognized these as the actions of a man succumbing to paranoia. But something deeper, more primal, insisted on preparation. I heated a can of beef stew on my small propane stove, forcing myself to eat despite lack of appetite. Wilderness training basics: maintain caloric intake regardless of stress levels. Physical weakness only compounds vulnerability. The radio crackled unexpectedly as I washed my dishes. "Unscheduled transmission for Ranger Kasky, Sector 17. Please acknowledge." I nearly dropped my plate in surprise. Unscheduled transmissions were rare, usually reserved for emergencies or weather alerts. "This is Kasky receiving. Go ahead." "Kasky, this is Ranger Nikwati at Central Dispatch. Be advised we've received reports of a missing hiker in your general vicinity. Male, approximately 35 years old. Last seen 3 days ago heading northwest from the Coldwater Trailhead. May have entered your sector. Keep alert and report any signs." My mouth went dry. "Copy that. Any description of equipment or clothing?" "Red North Face backpack, likely wearing gray hiking pants and a blue waterproof jacket. Carrying a black tent with orange trim. Name's Michael Brooks." "Understood. I'll begin sweep patterns tomorrow at first light." "Acknowledged. Regular transmission protocols remain in effect. Central Dispatch out." The radio went silent, leaving me with the unsettling realization that somewhere in my sector, a hiker might be lost, possibly injured, definitely vulnerable, with something else stalking these woods. I pulled out my topographical maps, marking probable routes someone might take if they'd started from Coldwater Trail. The most likely path would bring them within 5 miles of my cabin, close to the western ridge where I'd found the first set of tracks. Could there be a connection? The timing seemed too coincidental. Strange signs of an unknown predator appearing just as a hiker goes missing. I recalled cases from my training. Predators sometimes becoming bolder after successful hunts, escalating from wildlife to humans when opportunity presented. The thought twisted my stomach. If Brooks had encountered whatever I'd glimpsed at the lake's edge, sleep was impossible that night. I maintained a vigil by the window overlooking the lake, rifle across my lap, jumping at every sound from the surrounding forest. Around 2 a.m., the bells on my alarm system jingled faintly on the north side of the cabin. I was on my feet instantly, heart pounding against my ribs. Through the window, I could see nothing but darkness, the half-moon now obscured by clouds. I switched on my powerful flashlight, its beam cutting through the night like a knife. The illumination revealed nothing immediately threatening, just swaying branches and the gentle ripple of the lake's surface. I was about to dismiss it as wildlife, perhaps a fox or raccoon, when the beam caught a reflection of eyes watching from the tree line. Not the low-set eyes of a predatory mammal, but tall, at least 7 feet off the ground, and not the usual eyeshine of nocturnal animals. These eyes absorbed the light, appearing as dark voids against the night. They blinked once, deliberately, then vanished. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the flashlight. Training took over as I systematically swept the area with the beam, searching for movement. Nothing, until the sound came. A series of wood knocks, 3 in succession from the eastern perimeter, then answered by another series from the west. There were at least 2 of them. The knocking continued, a primitive communication I couldn't decipher but recognized as deliberate. They were coordinating, possibly planning to approach from multiple directions. I keyed my radio, protocol forgotten in the face of immediate threat. Emergency transmission from Sector 17. Possible hostile wildlife surrounding ranger station. Request immediate guidance. Only static answered. Whether due to the weather or deliberate interference, I was cut off. The satellite phone came next, but its screen remained stubbornly dark despite my certainty I'd charged it that afternoon. I was completely isolated. Another series of knocks, closer now, followed by a vocalization that raised the hairs on my neck, a deep, guttural sound that ended in something like words, distorted but almost comprehensible. I retreated to the center of the cabin, switching off all lights. Darkness would conceal my exact position from whatever watched outside. Standard procedure for wildlife encounters. Make yourself less visible, avoid provocative movements, wait for the animals to lose interest. But these weren't ordinary animals. The coordinated movements, the communications, the deliberate surveillance of my cabin, all suggested intelligence beyond instinct. A heavy thud against the outer wall made me flinch. Then another, not attacking but testing, checking the cabin's structural integrity, looking for weaknesses. I remembered the deer carcass suspended in the tree, the strength required to place it there. The wooden walls suddenly seemed frighteningly inadequate. The testing thuds moved methodically around the perimeter, accompanied by deep snuffling sounds at the windows. They were scenting me, tracking my movement inside by smell alone. Hours passed in this psychological siege. Occasionally branches or rocks would hit the roof or walls, startling me from the hyper-vigilant daze I'd fallen into. They were toying with me, I realized, like predators wearing down prey before the final attack. Just before dawn, when my nerves were stretched to breaking point, a different sound cut through the night. A human voice, distant but distinct, calling for help. "Hello, is anyone there? Help me." My first instinct was to respond, to rush out toward the voice. Park ranger training emphasized immediate response to distress calls, but something felt wrong. The voice was too perfect, too clear in the pre-dawn air, and it came from the exact direction where I'd seen those eyes watching earlier. "Please, I'm hurt. I can see your cabin." The missing hiker, Brooks, or a trap. Native tales spoke of creatures that could mimic human voices to lure the unwary into the woods. My grandmother's story suddenly didn't seem like mere folklore. I remained frozen in indecision until the voice called again, this time with a subtle difference, an underlying resonance that no human throat could produce, an echo quality that sent fresh waves of horror through me. Whatever waited in the darkness, it was not Michael Brooks. Dawn broke eventually, gray light seeping through the windows. The knocking and thumping had ceased around 5 a.m., and the voice had not called out again. Exhaustion dragged at my limbs as I cautiously approached each window, checking the surroundings. The forest appeared normal in the early light, peaceful even, but appearances in the wilderness could be deceiving. I waited until full daylight before venturing outside, rifle ready. The perimeter showed clear signs of visitation, branches broken at head height, disturbed earth where something heavy had circled repeatedly, and most disturbingly, claw marks gouged into the wooden exterior of the cabin near the door, testing the strength of my barricade. My trail cameras should have captured something, but when I checked the memory cards, I found them either completely empty or filled with corrupted images. Digital snow where clear footage should have been. As I stood contemplating this impossibility, movement caught my eye near the tree line. a flash of blue among the green and brown. With rifle raised, I approached cautiously, scanning for threats with each step. What I found stopped me cold. A blue waterproof jacket, torn and stained with what could only be blood, hanging from a branch like a flag. Michael Brooks' jacket. Below it lay a red North Face backpack, its contents scattered as if in rage or frustration. The missing hiker had indeed reached my sector, but he wouldn't be leaving it. At least, not alive. I photographed everything before touching it, then carefully examined the backpack, finding Brooks's identification and a journal. The final entry, dated 3 days earlier, contained words that chilled me more thoroughly than the night's siege. Day 4, something is following me, not animal, too deliberate. Found strange structures in clearing, wood twisted into shapes no wind could form. Heard knocking after sunset. Will try to reach ranger station marked on map tomorrow. Can't shake feeling I'm being herded. Herded. The word echoed in my mind as I looked back toward the cabin, suddenly understanding. The tracks, the sounds, the missing hiker, all of it forming a pattern I'd been too close to recognize. I wasn't documenting an unknown predator's behavior. I was being hunted. With Brooks's journal clutched in my trembling hands, I retreated to the cabin and barricaded myself inside. The implications were staggering. Not only was there something intelligent and predatory in these woods, but it had been systematically stalking human prey. I flipped through the journal's earlier pages, looking for clues. Brooks had been an experienced hiker, not some novice who'd wandered off trail. His notes were methodical, detailing campsites, wildlife sightings, and weather conditions. Nothing unusual until day 3, when he first mentioned feeling watched. Strange sensation all day, he'd written. Eyes on my back. Checked surroundings repeatedly, nothing visible. Yet presence undeniable. Rational explanation likely. Hidden wildlife or overactive imagination due to solitude. But by the next entry, his scientific detachment had crumbled. Found tracks today, massive, humanoid. Knowledge of North American wildlife extensive enough to state confidently, these match nothing documented. Followed creekbed north. Tracks disappeared at rock face. Took photos. I searched through his scattered belongings, but found no camera or phone. Whatever evidence he'd collected was either lost or taken. The final pages grew increasingly frantic, describing wood knocks following him. Structures of broken trees forming what he called territorial markers. And at night, eyes reflecting his flashlight beam from impossible heights among the trees. His last entry ended mid-sentence. If anyone finds this, tell Elaine My radio crackled to life, startling me so badly I nearly dropped the journal. Scheduled check-in for Ranger Caskey, Sector 17. Please acknowledge. I grabbed the handset, relief flooding through me at the sound of another human voice. This is Caskey, emergency situation. I've located evidence of missing hiker Brooks, believed deceased. Request immediate evacuation and search team. A long pause followed, then. Say again, Caskey. Signal breaking up. I repeated my message, more slowly and clearly. Copy that. Situation understood. However, current weather system moving in prevents immediate air support. Earliest extraction possible tomorrow morning, assuming conditions improve. Can you maintain position until then? I glanced at the claw marks by the door. Affirmative, but be advised. Possible predator involvement. Recommend armed search team when weather permits. Acknowledged. Maintain regular contact. Hourly radio checks until extraction. Dispatch out. The radio went silent, leaving me with the knowledge that I had at least 18 hours to survive before help would arrive. 18 hours against something that had already claimed one victim and seemed intent on adding me to its tally. I took inventory of my supplies, rifle with 40 rounds, service pistol with 15 rounds, emergency flare gun, 3 days of food, water purification system, first aid kit, and various tools. Enough for basic survival and self-defense, assuming conventional threats. But what I faced was anything but conventional. The weather worsened as predicted. By noon, rain lashed against the windows, and wind howled through the trees, creating a constant background of noise that made it impossible to detect subtle sounds of approach. Perfect conditions for an ambush. I maintained hourly radio contact as instructed. each time receiving confirmation that the extraction team was preparing, but delayed by weather. Each transmission seemed to take longer to receive response, the static growing worse as the storm intensified. By mid-afternoon, the sky had darkened to twilight levels, forcing me to use precious battery power for lighting. I positioned myself in the main room, away from windows, with clear sight lines to all possible entry points. The waiting was psychological torture, each creak of the cabin structure in the wind causing me to swing my rifle toward the sound. At 4:17 p.m. during a brief lull in the storm, I heard it, a clear, deliberate tapping on the window. Not branches blown by wind, but a rhythmic pattern. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap. I remained frozen, controlling my breathing as I'd been trained. Movement attracts predators. Stillness might buy precious seconds to aim. The tapping continued, moving from window to window around the cabin's perimeter, testing my alertness, my resolve. When it reached the rear window of the bedroom, I heard glass crack. It were done with testing. The siege was becoming an assault. I keyed the radio, speaking in urgent whispers. Emergency in Sector 17. Active breach attempt at Ranger Station. Request immediate assistance. Only static answered. The cracking glass crescendoed to shattering, followed by the thump of something heavy landing inside the bedroom. I swung my rifle toward the hallway, flicking off the safety with my thumb. The smell hit me first, a powerful musk mixed with something metallic and organic, the stench of old blood and wet fur. Then came the sound of movement, heavy yet strangely careful, exploring the bedroom methodically. I had two choices: wait for it to come to me or take the initiative. Tactical training favored the latter. Control the engagement rather than react to it. Swallowing my terror, I reached for the flare gun with my free hand. Not lethal, but disorienting. Might buy me time. The hallway floorboards creaked. It was moving toward me. I fired the flare down the corridor without looking, immediately dropping to the floor as brilliant red light flooded the cabin. A scream erupted, not animal, not quite human. A sound of rage and pain that vibrated through my bones. Taking advantage of the creature's disorientation, I army-crawled to the kitchen area, positioning myself behind the counter with clear line of fire to the hallway entrance. What emerged from that hallway defied everything I knew about North American wildlife. It stood over 7 feet tall, hunched to avoid the ceiling, covered in dark fur matted with mud and what looked disturbingly like dried blood. But it was the face that shattered my sanity, almost human in structure but elongated, with a heavy brow ridge and jaw powerful enough to crush bone. Its eyes reflected the dying flare light like a nocturnal predator's, but with terrible intelligence behind them. Our gazes locked, and in that moment, I knew with sickening certainty that I was not dealing with an animal. This creature understood exactly what I was, what my weapons could do, and how to counter them. I fired 3 rounds in rapid succession. The first 2 hit center mass, causing the creature to stagger backward. The third missed as it moved with shocking speed, retreating into the hallway with another of those bone-chilling screams. The sound was answered from outside, multiple vocalizations from different directions. Not just one creature, a group, a hunting party. My mind raced. The bedroom window was compromised. The injured one had retreated, but others waited outside. The storm would mask both their approach and any sounds of conflict from being heard by distant ears. Perfect hunting conditions. I had to abandon the cabin. It was no longer a shelter, but a trap. Gathering essential supplies into a small pack, ammunition, first aid, water, emergency rations, I prepared to make a run for it. My only chance was to reach the emergency shelter located 8 miles south, a reinforced concrete structure built to withstand the harshest conditions and predator attacks. If I could make it through the storm and evade my hunters, I might survive until extraction. The cabin had gone eerily quiet. No movement from the hallway, no sounds from outside. The silence was more terrifying than the screams had been. I inched toward the front door, rifle ready. The plan was simple but desperate. Open the door, lay down covering fire in a wide arc, then sprint for the southern trail while they were suppressed. With a deep breath, I threw open the door and raised my rifle. Nothing. The clearing before the cabin was empty, the rain coming down in sheets that limited visibility to 20 yards at most. I swept my rifle from left to right, searching for targets, finding none. This wasn't right. They wouldn't simply retreat after a successful breach. Not when they had me outnumbered. Unless... I spun around just as massive arms descended from above the doorframe. I'd checked every approach except up. The creature dropped onto me with crushing weight, driving me to the wooden porch. My rifle discharged harmlessly into the air before being torn from my grip by hands possessed of impossible strength. I fought with desperate intensity, managing to free my service pistol and fire point blank into the mass of fur and muscle above me. The creature recoiled enough for me to scramble backward, regaining my feet with adrenaline-fueled speed. It rose before me, bleeding from multiple wounds that should have been fatal, its eyes burning with hatred beyond anything I'd seen in animal or human. Behind it, shapes emerged from the tree line. 4 more of its kind, approaching with methodical purpose. They'd been waiting for me to run, to panic. This had been the plan all along. With the cabin at my back and enemies on all sides, I made the only choice available. I retreated inside, slamming and locking the door. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it bought precious seconds to think. The wounded one prowled the porch, its massive silhouette visible through the rain-streaked windows. The others maintained distance, watching, waiting for its lead. I retrieved my rifle from where it had fallen and positioned myself in the center of the main room, covering all entry points. My options were dire: make a stand here against impossible odds, or attempt to break out through the rear window, possibly running directly into an ambush. The radio crackled unexpectedly. Emergency response to Sector 17. Ranger Cascade, do you copy? I lunged for the handset. This is Cascade. Under attack, multiple hostiles. Copy that. Extraction team diverted from Western Sector. ETA 40 minutes. Can you maintain position? 40 minutes. An eternity under siege, but a concrete timeline. Help was coming. Affirmative. Be advised, hostiles are... I hesitated, knowing how it would sound. Humanoid. Extremely dangerous. Approach with caution. Say again, did you say humanoid? A massive fist punched through the front door, splintering wood as if it were paper. No time, just hurry. I dropped the radio and fired at the enlarging hole in the door. A scream confirmed my hit, but the assault didn't pause. Multiple points of attack now. Windows breaking, wood splintering as they systematically dismantled my shelter. My world narrowed to a cycle of aim, fire, move, repeat. I maintained constant motion, never allowing myself to become a stationary target. Each shot had to count. I couldn't afford to waste ammunition on suppressing fire. The cabin became a battleground of broken glass, splintered wood, and blood, both theirs and mine, as flying debris cut my face and hands. I lost track of time, aware only of the dwindling ammunition count and the growing number of entry points they'd created. When the front wall partially collapsed under their coordinated assault, I retreated to the bedroom, using the hallway as a choke point. 3 rounds left in the rifle, 7 in the pistol. Not enough. That's when I heard it. The distant but unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the south. The creatures heard it too. Their attack faltered momentarily, heads turning toward the sound with unmistakable recognition. They'd encountered helicopters before. They understood what it meant. Their assault redoubled with frenzied intensity. They knew time was against them now. The largest one, the first attacker I'd wounded, charged down the hallway with reckless abandon. I emptied my rifle into it, the impacts driving it to its knees mere feet from where I stood. But it kept coming, crawling forward with single-minded determination, even as its lifeblood poured onto the wooden floor. I switched to my pistol as it lunged one final time, firing directly into its face at point-blank range. The creature collapsed at my feet, its massive body convulsing once before going still. The others retreated at their leader's fall, vanishing into the storm as the helicopter sounds grew louder. Their withdrawal wasn't from fear, I sensed, but tactical necessity. They were intelligent enough to recognize when a hunt had failed, when to cut losses and regroup. Minutes later, blinding searchlights swept the clearing as a National Park Service helicopter descended through the storm, hovering as armed rangers rappelled to the ground and secured the perimeter. By the time they reached the cabin, I was sitting beside the massive body of my attacker. pistol empty, bleeding from dozens of cuts, in a state of shock that would take weeks to fully subside. "My God," the extraction team leader said, staring at the creature. "What is this thing?" I looked up at him, finding no words adequate to explain what I'd experienced, what I now knew existed in the remote corners of our wilderness. But as they loaded me into the helicopter, I glanced back at the tree line one last time. In the sweeping searchlights, I caught a glimpse of watching eyes, patient and calculating, before they melted back into the forest depths. They would wait. They had existed in these shadows for centuries, perhaps millennia, watching humanity's brief incursions into their domain with ancient patience. And I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that this encounter wasn't over. It was merely postponed. 6 weeks after my evacuation from Sector 17, I sat across from Director Reynolds in his Anchorage office, watching him page through my incident report with increasingly troubled expressions. "You understand the position this puts us in," he said finally, setting the document aside. "Your physical evidence was inconclusive." I traced the fresh scars on my forearm, claw marks that had required 27 stitches. "With respect, sir, there was nothing inconclusive about the cabin damage or my injuries. No one's disputing you were attacked, Kasky. The question is by what?" Reynolds leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The body you reported was gone when the secondary team arrived. No photographs exist except yours, which forensics has flagged as potentially compromised by lighting conditions and trauma-induced perception distortion. That's impossible. 4 Rangers witnessed it beside me." Reynolds slid a folder across the desk. "Their reports describe an unidentified large mammal, possibly ursine with physical abnormalities." I opened the folder with growing disbelief. The statements contradicted everything I'd experienced, describing a scene significantly downplayed from the reality I'd lived through. The creature became merely a large animal, the coordinated assault reduced to aggressive territorial behavior. "This isn't what happened," I said, pushing the folder away. "They're lying, or they've been instructed to lie." The director's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held something that might have been sympathy or fear. "The official finding is that you encountered an aggressive bear, possibly diseased or injured, displaying unusual behavior patterns. Brooks likely suffered the same fate earlier. Case closed." "And the other creatures? The coordinated hunting patterns? The structures in the forest?" My voice rose despite my efforts to remain professional. "The fact that it understood our weapons and communications?" "Post-traumatic stress is common after wildlife attacks, Ranger. The mind creates patterns, assigns intelligence to instinctive behaviors. It's a normal psychological response." I stared at him, suddenly understanding. "You've seen reports like mine before." His momentary hesitation confirmed it. "Your medical leave continues for another 6 weeks. Use the time, Kasky. Get perspective." "Perspective won't change what I saw. What's out there?" Reynolds stood, signaling the end of our meeting. "What's out there is a national park filled with natural wildlife, occasionally dangerous but thoroughly documented and understood. Nothing more." He paused at the door. "And for your own career prospects, I suggest you publicly embrace that reality." The message was clear. Conform to the official narrative or face professional isolation, possibly psychiatric evaluation and forced retirement. I left the Park Service headquarters with my future uncertain, but my resolve hardened. If official channels wouldn't acknowledge the truth, I would find another way to understand what I'd encountered, and warn others who might find themselves in similar danger. My research began subtly. Historical records of disappearances in national parks, unusual ranger reports subjected to redaction or loss, patterns emerging across decades of data that official explanations couldn't adequately address. I connected with others, former rangers, search and rescue personnel, researchers, who'd had similar experiences and faced similar institutional silence. We shared information through secure channels, building a database of encounters that stretched back to the earliest days of the National Park Service. 3 months after my attack, I returned to Alaska, not as a ranger but as a private citizen conducting wildlife research, with permits that carefully avoided specifying exactly what wildlife I sought to document. My new cabin sat just outside park boundaries, close enough to monitor activity in Sector 17, but beyond the jurisdiction of those who'd prefer. I forget what I'd seen. I came equipped not just with conventional weapons for self-defense, but with advanced surveillance technology, infrared cameras, audio recording equipment, and satellite communication systems immune to the interference I'd experienced before. The creatures, which I'd come to think of simply as watchers, maintained their territory with seasonal patterns I began to document. They were most active in the fall, when hikers were fewer but still present. They seemed to deliberately target isolated individuals, avoiding larger groups or those with dogs. Their intelligence became increasingly evident through my observation. They disabled trail cameras with disturbing regularity, approached cabins and campsites from downwind, and used diversionary tactics when hunting, skills beyond any recognized animal species. Most disturbing was their use of mimicry. I recorded dozens of instances of voice imitation, calls for help that could lure the unwary into ambush situations. They learned and adapted, studying human behavior with predatory calculation. I shared my findings with my underground network, contributing to a growing body of evidence that something existed in North America's wilderness that defied conventional classification. Neither pure animal nor human, but something that combined the worst predatory aspects of both. Official recognition remained elusive. When patterns became too obvious to ignore, explanations emerged. Mountain lions, bears, wolves, all known predators blamed for incidents that bore hallmarks of something else entirely. Those who publicly connected the dots faced ridicule, their credibility systematically dismantled. 1 year after my encounter, I received a package from an anonymous source within the Park Service. Inside was a single folder stamped "Classification Restricted," containing documents dating back to 1933. The earliest was a handwritten ranger report describing unknown bipedal creatures observed in the Olympic Mountains. Subsequent pages detailed a systematic policy of non-engagement, non-documentation, and active suppression of evidence. The final page was a memorandum dated 1977. Policy confirmation on unclassified bipedal hominids. Maintain existing protocols. Public awareness counterproductive to conservation and tourism objectives. Confirmed specimens remain priority for retrieval and classified research only. Witness management per Directive 255. B. The document validated everything I'd suspected. This wasn't ignorance or denial, it was policy. A decision made decades ago to hide the existence of something that would fundamentally change our understanding of what shared our wilderness. I continued my private research, gradually building relationships with indigenous trackers whose ancestors had coexisted with these creatures for thousands of years. Their perspective was revelatory. The beings weren't monsters, but another intelligent species, territorial and dangerous when threatened, but following their own complex social structures and rules. They've watched us since before we built cities, an elder Tlingit tracker told me. They know us better than we know ourselves, and they're waiting. For what? I asked. His response haunts me still. For us to leave, or for us to force them to make us leave. 5 years have passed since my encounter in Sector 17. I remain vigilant, documenting patterns, collecting evidence, and warning those who will listen without directly challenging the official narrative. The creatures maintain their territory, rarely venturing beyond wilderness boundaries. Occasional disappearances continue. Hikers who ignore warnings, solo travelers who venture too deep into marked zones on my increasingly detailed map of encounters. I've glimpsed them, occasionally at dusk, massive shadows moving with deliberate purpose between ancient trees. Sometimes they leave signs I've learned to recognize, twisted branches, strategically placed stones, markers intelligible only to those who know to look for them. Messages, boundaries, warnings. The Park Service maintains its silence. My former colleagues avoid me, though occasionally one will contact me privately after experiencing something they can't explain through conventional wildlife behavior. I've made my peace with this strange vigilance. I understand now that complete public disclosure might lead to panic, to armed expeditions seeking trophies, to habitat destruction that would force confrontation with a species that has, for the most part, chosen avoidance over conflict. So I watch and document and quietly warn those who venture too carelessly into territories marked on no official map. I maintain my network of like-minded observers across the country's wilderness areas. We share information, patterns, movements. We track without hunting. We know without officially knowing. And sometimes, on nights when the northern lights dance above my cabin and the forest stands silent in ancient contemplation, I sense them watching in return, patient, calculating, possessing a history and intelligence we've barely begun to comprehend. They were here before us, these shadows of the ancient forests. They may well remain long after our brief civilization has passed. They are neither myth nor monster, but something more complex. Intelligent predators sharing our continent while remaining just beyond the edge of our scientific understanding. For now, this uneasy coexistence continues. They keep to their shadows. We maintain our illusion of complete knowledge of our wilderness. But in remote ranger stations, in isolated cabins, in the deepest parts of our national forests, the truth remains. We are not alone in the darkness beneath the trees, and they are always watching. The first time I heard it, I was sitting on the weathered porch of my ranger cabin, watching the mist rise off Wakanda Lake. That's when the sound came, a long guttural howl that seemed to hang in the air long after it ended. Not a wolf, not a coyote, something else entirely. My name is Alex Bennett. 6 months ago, I left my corporate job in Seattle to become a ranger at Shadow Woods National Forest, nestled in the remote wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. The decision shocked everyone who knew me, trading a 6-figure salary and downtown apartment for isolation in one of the most remote ranger stations in the country. But after my wife's death last year, the city had become a prison of memories and regrets. The Wakanda Lake Ranger Station sits at the edge of a vast protected wilderness. The name Wakanda comes from the Sioux word meaning wonder, marvel, mystery, sacred, fitting for a place that seems to exist at the edge of two worlds. The local tribes consider this entire region sacred ground, particularly the mountains that rise beyond the lake like silent sentinels. The cabin itself was basic but functional, a main room with a small kitchen area, a bedroom, bathroom, and a covered porch that faced the lake. Solar panels provided limited electricity, and a satellite phone and radio were my only connections to the outside world. My nearest neighbor was another ranger station 20 miles south. I stood up from my chair and moved to the railing, scanning the tree line. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. In the strange half-light, the forest seemed to shift and breathe like something alive. I'd been a ranger long enough to know that dusk plays tricks on your eyes, but something about this evening felt different. The radio on my belt crackled to life. "Bennett, you there? Over." It was Diane Rodriguez, my supervisor based at headquarters nearly 40 miles away. I unclipped the radio. "Copy, Diane. What's up?" "Got a call about some hikers who haven't checked in. Family's worried. Couple in their 30s, Canadian tourists on the North Ridge Trail. They were supposed to camp at Eagle Point last night and head back this morning, but they never showed at the trailhead." I frowned. Missing hikers weren't uncommon, especially with amateur backpackers who underestimated the wilderness. Most showed up eventually, having taken a wrong turn or simply moving slower than planned. But with night falling and temperatures dropping, even experienced hikers could find themselves in trouble. "I can head out first thing in the morning to check the trail," I offered. "That's the thing. Storm system's moving in tomorrow. If they're still out there, they could be in real trouble. I know it's late, but if you could at least check the first few miles of the trail tonight." I glanced at the darkening sky. Night hikes weren't my favorite, but she was right. If the hikers were injured or lost, every hour counted. "Copy that. I'll gear up and head out now. Keep the radio open." "Thanks, Bennett. Be careful out there." As I packed my rescue gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The North Ridge Trail was well marked and popular with day hikers. It wasn't the type of place where people just disappeared. I strapped on my headlamp, grabbed my pack with emergency supplies, and holstered my service weapon. standard procedure for any night operation. As I locked the cabin and headed toward the trailhead, that strange howl echoed through the valley again, closer this time. The hair on my arm stood on end as I recognized what had been bothering me about the sound. It wasn't just the inhuman quality of the howl. It was the sense that it carried intention behind it, almost like a warning. The beam of my headlamp cut through the growing darkness as I started up the trail, moving steadily through the silent forest. The trees loomed around me, their shadows dancing in the artificial light. I called out periodically, my voice seeming smaller and more insignificant with each echo. "Hello, Park Service, anyone out here?" Only the wind answered, rustling through the canopy above. I'd gone about 2 miles when I found the first sign that something was wrong. A hiking pole lay abandoned on the trail, its owner nowhere in sight. Nearby, a water bottle had been crushed as if stepped on by something heavy. I crouched down, examining the ground. The soft earth was marked with footprints, some clearly human, others less so. Among the obvious boot prints were other impressions that made my breath catch. Large, barefoot-like prints nearly twice the size of my own boots. I'd worked in wildlife management before becoming a ranger, and knew every animal track native to these woods. These matched nothing in my experience. As I stood, something caught my eye, a flash of color against the dark foliage. Moving carefully off the trail, I discovered a torn backpack hanging from a branch, as if it had been ripped from someone's back and flung there. The fabric was shredded, its contents scattered across the forest floor, and there was blood. Not much, but enough to confirm that whatever had happened here hadn't been a simple case of hikers wandering off trail. I reached for my radio, my fingers suddenly clumsy with adrenaline. "Diane, it's Bennett. I found signs of something on the North Ridge Trail, abandoned gear, possible blood. No sign of the hikers yet, but..." I hesitated, unsure how to describe the massive footprints without sounding like I'd lost my mind. "I think we need a full search team out here at first light." Static crackled for a moment before her voice came through. "Copy that. Are you in any danger? Should you head back?" Before I could answer, a scream tore through the night, a woman's voice, high and terrified, coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. "I heard something," I said quickly into the radio. "Possible survivor. I'm going to investigate." "Bennett, wait for backup." Diane's voice was cut off as I clipped the radio to my belt and broke into a run, heading in the direction of the scream. The forest seemed to close in around me as I moved away from the trail, branches clawing at my clothing. I called out again but received no response. The beam of my headlamp bounced wildly as I ran, creating disorienting shadows that seemed to move with lives of their own. I burst into a small clearing and stopped short. In the center lay another backpack, this one intact. Beside it was a camera, its lens cracked. I picked it up, checking if it still worked. The screen flickered to life, showing the last image taken, a blurry photo of the forest at sunset. But there, at the edge of the frame, partially hidden behind a tree, was a dark figure standing upright, too tall to be human, too human-shaped to be a bear. A branch snapped somewhere behind me. I spun around, drawing my service weapon in one fluid motion. My headlamp illuminated nothing but trees and undergrowth. "Park Service, identify yourself." My voice sounded thin and ineffective in the vastness of the forest. The silence that followed was absolute. No insects chirping, no leaves rustling. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Then came a low, rumbling growl from the darkness beyond my light's reach. The sound vibrated through my chest, primal and threatening. Something was watching me. Something that didn't belong in these woods. Or perhaps belonged here more than I did. I backed away slowly, keeping my weapon raised, and my light pointed toward the sound. The growl came again, closer this time. And then, just at the edge of my light's beam, I saw movement. A massive shadow detaching itself from the darkness between two ancient Douglas firs. For one terrible moment, the creature stepped partially into the light, and I saw it clearly, over 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur, with a face that was almost but not quite human. Its eyes reflected my light like a deer's, but with an intelligence that froze the blood in my veins. Then it was gone, melting back into the darkness with impossible speed and silence for something so large. I didn't remember running. Somehow I found myself back on the trail, sprinting toward the ranger station, my lungs burning and my mind reeling from what I'd seen. Only when the cabin's porch light came into view did I slow down, gasping for breath, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the door key. Once inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, sliding down to sit on the floor. My radio crackled. "Bennett, Bennett, do you copy? What's happening out there?" I raised the radio with trembling fingers. I'm back at the station. Couldn't find the source of the scream, lost the trail." I couldn't bring myself to describe what I'd seen. Not yet. Not until I was sure I hadn't imagined it. "Are you all right? You sound shaken." "Just tired. It's been a long day." I paused. "Have we heard anything more from the missing hiker's family?" "That's why I was trying to reach you. They just called again. The hikers showed up at a ranger station on the other side of the mountain. Apparently, they decided to take a different route and forgot to notify anyone. False alarm." Relief washed over me, quickly followed by confusion. If the hikers were safe, then whose scream had I heard? Whose blood had I found? And what had I seen in that clearing? "Bennett, you still there?" "Yeah, just glad they're okay. I'll file my report in the morning." "Roger that. Get some rest." I set the radio down and moved to the window, peering out at the dark forest. The porch light illuminated only a small circle, beyond which the night seemed deeper and more impenetrable than ever before. As I stood there, I noticed something on the ground just at the edge of the light, a large footprint pressed into the mud, identical to those I'd seen on the trail. Whatever I had encountered in the forest had followed me home, and somewhere in the darkness, it was waiting. Chapter 2, Ancient Whispers. Morning came with an unsettling calm. No bird songs, no rustling creatures in the underbrush, just a heavy silence that hung over the landscape like a shroud. I hadn't slept much, spending most of the night with my back against the cabin wall, service weapon within reach, jumping at every creak and groan of the old structure. In the harsh light of day, I began to question what I'd seen. Had exhaustion and the stress of nighttime search operations played tricks on my mind? The alternative, that something unknown was stalking the forest, seemed too fantastic to contemplate. But there was no denying the physical evidence. After a quick breakfast, I ventured outside to examine the footprint I'd spotted the night before. In the morning light, it was even more defined, nearly 18 inches long, with 5 distinct toe impressions. I photographed it and took measurements, trying to maintain a scientific detachment that might counteract the primitive fear still coursing through my veins. The radio crackled to life on the porch table where I'd left it. "Bennett, you copy, it's Diane." I grabbed the radio. "I'm here. What's up?" "Got someone coming your way this morning. Cultural liaison from the Wakanda tribe. Says they need to speak with you about something urgent." I frowned. The local tribal council occasionally sent representatives to discuss conservation issues or access to sacred sites within the park boundaries, but those meetings were usually scheduled well in advance. Did they say what it's about? Something about unusual activity in the forest. Probably those university researchers we approved last month. They were supposed to check in with the tribe, but you know academics. She paused. "Anyway, his name's Joseph Redhorn. Should be at your station around 11. "Copy that. I'll be here." After signing off, I retreated to the cabin and pulled out the region's wildlife management guide, flipping through sections on bears, wolves, and mountain lions. Nothing matched what I'd seen. I switched to my laptop, pulling up reports of unusual sightings in the area. There were a few, hikers claiming to have seen something big moving through the trees, strange sounds at night, unexplained livestock deaths on farms bordering the national forest. Most had been dismissed as bear encounters or hoaxes, but reading between the lines, I could see a pattern. The sightings clustered around certain areas of the forest, particularly the ancient growth sections near Wakanda Lake and the ridge where I'd been searching the night before. At precisely 11, a dusty pickup truck pulled up to the ranger station. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, with long black hair pulled back in a ponytail. He wore jeans, work boots, and a flannel shirt. Practical attire for the mountains, but the silver and turquoise necklace he wore marked him as someone connected to the local tribe. I stepped onto the porch to greet him. "Mr. Redhorn, I'm Ranger Bennett." He nodded, his dark eyes appraising me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Joseph is fine. Thanks for meeting with me." His handshake was firm, calloused, the hands of someone who worked outdoors. I invited him inside, offering coffee, which he accepted with a nod of thanks. We sat at the small table in the main room, an awkward silence stretching between us until he finally spoke. "You went into the eastern section of the forest last night." It wasn't a question. I raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast." "It does when it concerns certain areas." He sipped his coffee. "Did you see anything unusual out there?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Something about Joseph's demeanor suggested he already knew the answer to his question. "I was searching for missing hikers," I said carefully. "They turned up safe, but while I was out there, I found some unusual tracks. And I heard something, saw something maybe." I shook my head. "Probably just shadows and exhaustion playing tricks on me." Joseph set down his cup and leaned forward. "What if I told you it wasn't your imagination? That what you encountered has been known to my people for generations?" A chill ran down my spine. "I'd say that sounds like the beginning of a campfire story." "Not a story, a warning." His expression remained deadly serious. "The area where you were last night is called Dakota in our language. It means friend to everyone. An ironic name for a place that's home to something that's friend to no one." "You're talking about Bigfoot?" I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. Joseph didn't flinch at my tone. "We don't back to the ranger station. We can get you some food, water, rest." For the first time, his eyes seemed to register my presence, though his gaze remained disturbingly vacant. "Can't leave, not until it's finished. They'll be angry." "Who will be angry, Michael?" Morgan asked gently. "The Watchers, the Shadows, they've always been here." He turned back to his branches and resumed striking them together. "Have to finish the tribute, have to finish." I exchanged a worried glance with Morgan. The man was clearly experiencing some kind of psychological break. Whether from fear, exhaustion, dehydration, or something else, he needed medical attention. "Jamie," I said quietly, "go back to camp and radio for emergency evacuation. Tell them we found Wells, but he's in an altered mental state and needs immediate medical assistance." Jamie nodded and backed away, turning to jog back the way we'd come. "Michael," I tried again, "whatever you think you need to do, it can wait. Your health is more important right now." He ignored me completely this time, lost in his rhythmic percussion and muttering to himself. I lowered my voice, speaking to Morgan. "I'm going to have to bring him out forcibly. He's not in his right mind." She nodded, her expression concerned. "Be careful. We don't know what triggered this state." I approached Wells from the side, not wanting to startle him. When I was within arm's reach, I spoke once more. "Michael, I'm going to take you somewhere safe now." No response, just continued striking of the branches. I reached out and gently but firmly grasped his arm. Instantly, his demeanor changed from vacant to violent. He whirled, swinging one of the heavy branches directly at my head. I ducked just in time, the makeshift club whistling over my head. "No!" he screamed, his face contorted with sudden rage. "The tribute must be completed!" He swung again. This time I was ready, catching his wrist and using his momentum to pull him off balance. We tumbled to the ground, Wells thrashing wildly beneath me as I struggled to restrain him without causing injury. "Morgan, my pack," I called. "Side pocket, restraints." She rushed to where I'd dropped my day pack and retrieved the zip tie restraints I carried for emergencies. Together, we managed to secure Wells's wrists and ankles, though not without collecting several bruises in the process. Throughout the struggle, he continued to scream about the tribute and the Watchers, his eyes wild and spittle flying from his mouth. Only when he was fully restrained did he finally slump in defeat, sobbing quietly. "What happened to him?" Morgan asked, her face pale with shock. "I don't know, but we need to get him out of here before dark." I checked my watch. We had maybe 2 hours of daylight left and clouds were gathering overhead, promising the forecasted storm. "Help me get him on his feet. We'll have to half-carry him back to camp." As we pulled Wells to a standing position, a deep, reverberating growl emanated from the dense forest beyond the crude shelter. We froze, and even Wells fell silent, his head snapping up in the direction of the sound, a look of reverent fear replacing his previous rage. "They're coming," he whispered. The tribute wasn't finished. "They're coming." Another growl, closer this time, followed by the distinct sound of heavy footsteps moving through the undergrowth. Not one set, but several, surrounding us. "We need to move, now." I pulled Wells toward the path back to camp, but he suddenly went limp, dead weight in our arms. "No," he moaned. "Can't leave. They'll follow. Always follow." The footsteps grew closer, branches cracking under significant weight. I drew my service weapon, though I had little faith it would be effective against multiple attackers of the size I'd encountered before. "Back to back," I instructed Morgan. "Keep Wells between us." We moved together toward camp, slowly. She nodded, her fear evident but controlled, as she took position behind me, helping support the now uncooperative Wells. We began to edge backward, toward the path Jamie had taken. The growls and movement continued, always just out of sight, pacing us, hurting us. "They're hunting us," Morgan whispered, "using pack tactics." Wells laughed suddenly, a high, unhinged sound. "Not hunting, escorting, to the valley. Where all must go, where all must see." "See what, Michael?" I asked, hoping to gain some insight that might help us escape. His answer chilled me to the bone. "The old one, the first one, the one who speaks." Before I could question him further, a massive figure stepped into view about 30 yards ahead, directly blocking our path back to camp. It resembled the creature I'd encountered before, tall, broad, covered in dark fur. But there was something different about this one. Its bearing, perhaps, or the silver-gray streaks in its fur. It stood fully upright, making no attempt to conceal itself, directly facing us. And then it did something that defied everything I thought I knew about the natural world. It raised one long-fingered hand and deliberately beckoned to us. Wells began to struggle against his restraints. "The summoning, we must go, we must answer." Morgan's grip on my arm tightened painfully. "Alex, it's intelligent, fully intelligent." "I know." My mind raced through possibilities, none of them pleasant. "But we're not following it anywhere." I raised my weapon, aiming above the creature's head, and fired a warning shot. The report echoed through the trees, momentarily silencing the forest. The creature didn't flinch. Instead, it growled again, a complex sound that almost seemed to contain patterns, like crude speech. From the forest around us came answering growls. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature turned and melted back into the trees, vanishing from sight. The sounds of movement continued, but they were retreating now, moving away from us, deeper into the forest. Wells collapsed suddenly, as if a puppet's strings had been cut, unconscious but breathing. The abrupt change was so jarring that for a moment we just stood there, supporting his limp form, unsure what had happened. "Is he okay?" Morgan asked, helping me lower him to the ground. I checked his vital signs, pulse rapid but strong, breathing regular. "I think he just passed out, probably for the best. Help me get him up. We need to move while they're gone." We fashioned a crude stretcher using branches in my jacket, securing Wells to it as best we could. The work was quick but exhausting, and by the time we began to move, the first drops of rain were pattering through the canopy above. The journey back to camp was nightmarish, struggling with the makeshift stretcher over uneven ground, jumping at every sound, the rain increasing from scattered drops to a steady downpour that reduced visibility to mere yards. By the time the clearing came into view, we were soaked, mud-covered, and near exhaustion. Jamie rushed out to meet us, his face a mask of concern. "What happened? Is he all right?" "Help us get him into the tent," I gasped, my arms burning from the effort of carrying Wells. "Did you radio for evacuation?" Jamie nodded as he took over my position at the front of the stretcher. "Yes, but they can't send a helicopter in this weather. They're dispatching a ground team with medical personnel, but they won't reach us until morning." Once inside the larger research tent, we transferred Wells to a sleeping pad and covered him with emergency blankets. He remained unconscious but stable, occasionally muttering in his sleep. "What happened out there?" Jamie asked as Morgan checked Wells's vitals again. "I heard a gunshot." I explained our encounter as succinctly as possible. Wells's strange behavior, the crude shelter, the surrounding creatures, and the silver-backed one that had beckoned to us. Jamie's face paled. It wanted you to follow it? Where? Wells mentioned something called the Valley and the Old One, whatever that means. I ran a hand through my rain-soaked hair. But I don't think they've given up. They retreated too easily. You think they'll come back? Morgan asked, looking up from Wells. I'm certain of it. We need to prepare. I checked my watch. Barely an hour of daylight left. We'll take shifts keeping watch. I'll take first shift, then Morgan, then Jamie. 4 hours each. What about him? Jamie nodded toward Wells. Keep him restrained but comfortable. When he wakes up, try to get him to drink water. Don't ask him questions about what happened. It might trigger another episode. We spent the remaining daylight securing the camp as best we could, setting up early warning systems with tin cans and fishing line, positioning the trail cameras to cover all approaches, and gathering extra firewood to keep a blaze going through the night. The rain continued steadily, making the work miserable, but perhaps providing some advantage. The downpour would mask smaller sounds and might discourage our pursuers, though I doubted creatures adapted to this forest would be deterred by mere weather. As darkness fell, I took up my position at the edge of the clearing, partially sheltered from the rain by a tarp we'd rigged. The campfire sputtered in the downpour but continued burning, casting flickering light across the clearing and creating shifting shadows that played havoc with my already strained nerves. Morgan and Jamie retreated to the research tent with Wells, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the relentless patter of rain. I checked and rechecked my weapon, though the encounter earlier had reinforced my suspicion that it would provide little protection if the creatures decided to attack in force. An hour into my watch, the rain finally began to slacken, and with its diminishment came the return of forest sounds, the drip of water from leaves, the occasional call of a night bird, the rustle of small animals emerging from shelter, normal sounds, reassuring sounds, until they stopped. The silence descended suddenly and completely, as it had during my previous encounters. I straightened, every sense alert, scanning the tree line for movement. Nothing visible, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I reached for the radio to alert Morgan and Jamie, but hesitated. False alarms would only increase everyone's stress, and so far, there was nothing concrete to report. A soft thud from behind me made me whirl around, weapon raised. Nothing moved in the flickering firelight, but there, at the edge of the clearing opposite my position, lay a dead rabbit. As I watched, confused, another object arced from the darkness into the clearing. A cluster of berries tied with grass into a crude bundle. More objects followed, tossed from different positions around the perimeter. Nuts, a fish, a cluster of edible mushrooms, all landing in a rough circle around our camp. Food. They were bringing us food. Morgan, I called softly toward the tent. You need to see this. She emerged cautiously, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. They're bringing offerings. Or returning them, I suggested. These might be the tributes Wells was leaving. Jamie joined us, keeping his voice low. Why would they do that? I don't know, but it feels like communication. Morgan moved closer to one of the food bundles, studying it without touching. Complex behavior, symbolic thinking. From the surrounding forest came the now familiar growls, not threatening this time, but conversational, passing back and forth between unseen positions. A complex exchange that, despite its alien nature, unmistakably resembled language. They're talking about us, Jamie whispered, an edge of awe in his voice. Wells's voice suddenly called from the tent, startlingly clear and coherent. They want to show you the way. They've chosen you. We turned to find him sitting up on his sleeping pad, the vacant look gone from his eyes, replaced by something like resignation. Somehow, he'd managed to free himself from the restraints. Michael, I said cautiously, how are you feeling? Clearer now. It comes and goes. He rubbed his wrists where the zip ties had been. I remember some of what happened. I'm sorry I attacked you. What's happening here? Morgan asked, kneeling beside him. Who are these creatures? What do they want? Wells's gaze drifted toward the forest. They've been here forever, watching, learning. They know things, old things. He drew a shaky breath. They showed me the valley where the oldest one lives, the one who remembers the time before humans. Why did they take you there? I asked. To learn, to teach. Wells's eyes found mine, suddenly intense. They're dying out. Fewer each generation. They need us to know they exist before it's too late. They need witnesses. A particularly loud growl from the forest made us all turn. At the edge of the firelight stood the silver-backed creature, the same one that had beckoned to us earlier. Behind it, partially hidden in shadows, were at least 3 others. It's the elder, Wells whispered. The one who speaks for the tribe. The creature stepped forward, its movements deliberate and unnervingly human-like. In one hand, it carried a branch with a crude hook fashioned at one end. It stopped at the edge of our camp and used the branch to draw a simple shape in the dirt, a rough triangle with a line bisecting it. Morgan gasped softly. It's drawing a map. That's the ravine, the Shadow Valley. The creature added another mark, a circle at the narrow end of the triangle. What's it trying to tell us? Jamie asked, his voice barely audible. Where to go, Wells answered. The circle is the sacred place, where the oldest one dwells. The creature looked directly at us, its gaze moving from face to face, lingering longest on mine. Then it made a gesture that was unmistakable, a beckoning motion, followed by pointing toward the east, toward the valley. It wants us to follow it. Now, tonight. I shook my head. That's not happening. Wells struggled to his feet. You don't understand. This is unprecedented. They've never reached out like this before. It's an invitation, not a threat. An invitation to what? Jamie demanded. To disappear like all those missing hikers? To learn the truth. Wells's voice took on that same reverent quality I'd heard earlier. To see what no human has seen in generations. The creature growled again, this time with a note of impatience, and gestured more emphatically toward the east. I made a decision. Morgan, Jamie, get back in the tent with Wells. I'll handle this. Alex, Morgan began to protest. Now, I insisted. Please. Once they had reluctantly retreated, I turned back to the creature. Standing as tall as I could, I shook my head firmly and pointed to the ground, then to the sky, trying to convey that we would stay here until daylight. The creature stared at me for a long moment, its expression impossible to read on a face so alien, yet disturbingly familiar. Then it made a sound that sent chills down my spine, not a growl or roar, but a series of guttural vocalizations that unmistakably formed a pattern. It was trying to speak. When I didn't respond, it tried again, the sounds different this time, as if it were attempting different languages or dialects. Finally, it made a sound of frustration and turned away, moving back toward the forest edge. Before disappearing into the trees, it paused and looked back, making one final gesture, both hands raised, palms outward, in what could only be interpreted as a sign of peace. Then it was gone, melting into the darkness with its companions. I remained standing guard for nearly an hour after they left, half expecting them to return. When it became clear they were truly gone, at least for now, I returned to the tent to find Morgan and Jamie huddled around a battery-powered lantern, Wells dozing fitfully on his sleeping pad. What happened? Morgan asked. We couldn't see from inside. I described the creature's attempts at communication, the sounds it had made, and its final peaceful gesture. I think it was trying to talk to me, actually talk. That's incredible, Morgan breathed. If they have their own language or can imitate human speech even partially. It means they're not just intelligent animals, Jamie finished. They're something else entirely. Something that wants us to follow them into a remote valley in the middle of the night, I reminded them. Whatever their intentions, that's not happening. We stick to the plan. Watch shifts through the night, evacuation team arrives in the morning. Morgan looked disappointed, but nodded. You're right. Safety first. I checked my watch. My shift has another 2 hours. You two should try to get some sleep. As they settled in for the night, I returned to my post, my mind racing with questions. What were these creatures? Why had they chosen now to reach out? And what was in the valley that they so desperately wanted to show us? The night deepened, the storm passed, and stars appeared between breaks in the clouds. My watch passed without further incident, as did Morgan's after me. By the time Jamie woke me for the final shift before dawn, exhaustion had overcome my anxiety, and I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. I awoke to Jamie's urgent voice. "Alex, wake up. Something's wrong." I sat up groggily, blinking in the early morning light filtering through the tent walls. "What is it?" "Wells is gone." "What do you mean, gone?" I was instantly alert, reaching for my boots. "I went to check on him during my watch, and he wasn't there," Jamie explained, his expression tense. "His sleeping bag was empty, still warm. I've looked everywhere around camp, no sign of him." I emerged from the tent to find Morgan already searching the perimeter of the clearing, her face drawn with worry. The morning was clear and cold, dew glistening on the grass, birds singing as if nothing was amiss. "Any tracks?" I called to her. She pointed toward the eastern edge of the clearing. "Footprints leading that way. They look like his hiking boots." I joined her, examining the tracks. They were clear in the soft mud left by last night's rain. A single set of human footprints, moving purposefully toward the forest, toward the Shadow Valley. "He's gone after them," I said grimly. "Voluntarily from the look of it, no signs of struggle." "What do we do?" Jamie asked, coming to stand beside us. "The evacuation team will be here in a few hours." I weighed our options quickly. Wells was in an unstable mental state, heading deeper into dangerous territory. We couldn't just wait for backup. "Morgan, you stay here to meet the evacuation team. Tell them everything that's happened and guide them to our location. Jamie and I will follow Wells's trail and try to bring him back." Morgan shook her head firmly. "I'm coming with you. This is my area of expertise, and we're more likely to find him safely if I'm there to interpret any, interactions." She had a point, but I didn't like the idea of leaving no one behind to meet the rescue team. Before I could argue, Jamie spoke up. "I'll stay. I can maintain the camp and guide the team when they arrive." When I hesitated, he added, "Look, I'm not ashamed to admit those things terrify me. I'm a research assistant, not a field operator. You two have a much better chance of finding Wells without me slowing you down." I couldn't argue with his logic. "All right, take my satellite phone. Call in hourly updates on our position." I handed him a map where I'd marked our planned route toward the valley. "If you don't hear from us by noon, tell the evacuation team exactly where we went and why." Jamie nodded solemnly. "Be careful, both of you." We packed quickly. Light day packs with water, emergency rations, first aid supplies, and the essential tools of our respective trades. My service weapon and Morgan's camera equipment. Within 20 minutes, we were following Wells's tracks into the forest. The trail was easy to follow at first. Wells had made no attempt to hide his passage, moving directly east toward the valley. His footprints were joined occasionally by larger, non-human prints. The creatures were traveling with him or following him, but not forcing him. "He's going willingly," Morgan observed, photographing the intermingled tracks. "Look how steady his gait is. Not running, not being dragged." "That doesn't mean he's in his right mind," I reminded her. "You saw his state yesterday. They've done something to him, influenced him somehow. Or shown him something that changed his perspective." She straightened, tucking her camera away. "Not everything unknown is malevolent, Alex." I didn't respond, focusing instead on maintaining our pace through the increasingly difficult terrain. The forest was changing character again. The trees older and more gnarled, the undergrowth thicker. Moss hung from branches like spectral fingers, and the light took on a greenish quality as it filtered through the dense canopy. After about an hour of hiking, we reached a ridge overlooking a steep decline, the western edge of the Shadow Valley. Below us stretched a narrow ravine, perhaps half a mile wide and 2 miles long, its floor shrouded in mist. Ancient trees grew along its slopes, their massive roots exposed by erosion, creating a twisted landscape that seemed almost deliberately designed to evoke unease. "There it is," I said softly. "Dakota, the Shadow Valley." Morgan stood beside me, her expression awed. "It's beautiful in a primal way, and dangerous. I count at least a dozen ways to break an ankle or worse on the way down." I studied the slope below us, looking for the safest route. Wells' tracks lead straight down. Either he knows what he's doing or he doesn't care about the risks. "Or he has guides who know the way," Morgan suggested, pointing to where a faint path zigzagged down the slope. We began our descent carefully, using tree roots and rocks as handholds. The path, once we found it, was surprisingly well maintained, not in the modern sense of trail upkeep, but in an older way, with strategic branches removed and loose rocks cleared. It had the feel of something used regularly over a very long time. The mist thickened as we descended, reducing visibility and adding to the otherworldly atmosphere. Sounds were muffled, distances distorted. More than once I thought I glimpsed movement in the peripheral vision, only to find nothing when I turned to look directly. "They're watching us," Morgan whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft dripping of water from leaves. "I can feel it." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The sense of being observed was overwhelming, but for the first time it didn't feel threatening, more curious, evaluating. We reached the valley floor without incident, finding ourselves in a strange microclimate. The temperature was warmer here, protected from winds by the surrounding cliffs, and the vegetation was different. Ferns and flowering plants that shouldn't have been thriving this early in the season. Wells's tracks continued along a small stream that ran the length of the valley, joined now by numerous large footprints. They were traveling as a group, heading toward the eastern end of the ravine. As we followed, I noticed unusual structures in the trees and undergrowth, crude platforms in the higher branches, woven screens of vegetation that could serve as shelters or blinds, even what appeared to be deliberately cultivated patches of berry bushes and other edible plants. "This is a settlement," Morgan breathed, her eyes wide as she took in the signs of habitation. "They live here, actually live here, with structures and food management." "But no fire," I noted. "No tools beyond the most primitive. No need for either, perhaps. They're adapted to this environment in ways we aren't." We continued along the stream path, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being permitted to see these things, that normally human visitors would never be allowed to penetrate this far into their territory without being challenged. The ravine narrowed as we progressed, the cliff walls drawing closer together, until we reached what appeared to be a dead end, a sheer rock face, perhaps 100 feet high, covered in moss and ferns. The stream emerged from a small cave at its base, barely large enough for a person to enter if they crouched. Wells's footprints led directly into this cave. "He went in there?" Morgan asked, eyeing the dark opening dubiously. "Looks that way?" I switched on my flashlight and knelt to examine the cave mouth more closely. "It's tight but passable. The real question is what's on the other side. Only one way to find out." Morgan activated her own light and adjusted her pack to sit lower on her back. "I'll go first if you want. I'm smaller." I shook my head. "No, I'll go. If there's danger ahead, I'm better equipped to handle it." I patted my holstered weapon. "If there's danger ahead, that won't help much," she countered, but stepped back to allow me to take the lead. I approached the cave cautiously, shining my light into its depths. The passage extended about 20 feet before making a sharp turn, water flowing along its floor in a shallow stream. The air flowing from it was cool and damp, carrying an earthy smell of wet stone and something else, a musky animal scent I now recognized from my close encounters with the creatures. "They use this passage," I said softly, "recently and regularly." Taking a deep breath, I crouched and entered the cave, moving slowly to avoid slipping on the wet stone. The passage was narrow but navigable, forcing me to hunch over but not quite requiring crawling. Morgan followed close behind, her breathing quick but controlled. After the tight initial section, the passage widened enough to stand upright, though the ceiling remained low. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the sound of flowing water grew louder ahead of us. We rounded the sharp bend and found ourselves in a larger chamber, perhaps 30 feet across, where the stream pooled into a small, crystal-clear pond before continuing through another passage. Pale fungi grew on the walls, giving off a faint bioluminescence that cast the chamber in an ethereal blue-green light. "Incredible," Morgan whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. "These fungi are similar to species found in deep caves, but I've never seen them this close to a surface entrance." I was more concerned with the fresh footprints in the mud beside the pool. Wells had come this way, and recently. More worryingly, he wasn't alone. Larger prints accompanied his, along with marks that suggested something heavy had been dragged. "This way," I indicated the continuing passage where the stream flowed out of the chamber. "Stay close." The next section was easier going, a natural tunnel perhaps 7 feet high and 5 feet wide, its walls smooth from millennia of water flow. We followed it for what seemed like several hundred yards, the sound of rushing water growing steadily louder ahead. Eventually, the tunnel opened onto a site that stopped us in our tracks. We stood on a stone ledge overlooking an immense underground cavern, so large that our lights couldn't reach the far walls or ceiling. Below us, the stream plunged in a small waterfall to join an underground river that wound through the cavern floor. Natural columns of stone rose from floor to ceiling in places, while stalactites hung like petrified spears from above. But it was what occupied the cavern that truly stole our breath. Along the riverbanks and on natural stone platforms throughout the space were dozens of crude structures, shelters built from branches, animal hides, and woven vegetation. Larger versions of what we'd glimpsed outside, these were clearly dwellings, arranged in a rough circle around a central open area where a larger structure stood. And moving among these dwellings were the creatures, at least 20 of them that I could see, going about what could only be described as daily life. Some carried bundles of vegetation, others appeared to be grooming one another, and smaller figures that must have been juveniles played in shallower parts of the river. "It's a village," Morgan whispered, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. "An actual functioning village. They're not just intelligent animals. They're a society." I couldn't process what I was seeing. Everything I thought I knew about the natural world was being upended. These weren't random forest predators. They were an unknown species of intelligent primates with social structures, dwellings, and what appeared to be roles within their community. "Where's Wells?" I murmured, scanning the activity below for any sign of the missing hiker. Morgan pointed toward the central structure, larger than the others, with a roof of woven branches that created a dome perhaps 15 feet high. "There, I think. I see movement inside." A narrow path led down from our ledge to the cavern floor. As we hesitated, unsure how to proceed, the decision was made for us. A large male, the same silver-backed individual we'd encountered at the camp, stepped into view at the bottom of the path and looked up directly at us. It made that same beckoning gesture we'd seen before, then turned and walked deliberately toward the central structure. "An invitation?" Morgan said. "Again." "Or a trap," I countered, but without much conviction. If they'd wanted to harm us, they'd had ample opportunity already. "What do we do?" I considered our options. Retreating would mean abandoning Wells, who clearly needed help regardless of his current mental state. And I couldn't deny a burning curiosity to understand what was happening here, what these creatures were, and why they had chosen to reveal themselves now. "We go down," I decided. "Slowly, non-threateningly. Stay close to me." We descended the path carefully, acutely aware of the eyes watching our progress. As we reached the cavern floor, the creatures nearest to us moved back, creating a respectful distance but not fleeing. Up close, their diversity was more apparent, varying sizes, coloration, and what seemed to be age differences. All walked upright with an ease that suggested it was their natural posture. The silverback waited for us by the central structure, standing nearly 8 feet tall now that we were on the same level. Close up, its face was more expressive than I'd realized. Deep-set eyes beneath a heavy brow, a flattened nose, and a mouth currently set in what might have been a grimace or a smile. It was impossible to read expressions designed for a different species. When we were within a few feet, it made a series of sounds, those same patterned vocalizations I'd heard at the camp, but clearer now, more deliberate. I still couldn't understand them, but their linguistic structure was unmistakable. It was talking to us. Morgan slowly raised her hands, palms outward, mimicking the peace gesture we'd seen earlier. "We come as friends," she said clearly. "We're looking for our friend, the human who came here before us." The creature tilted its head, studying her intently. Then it turned and pulled aside a flap of hide that served as a door to the central structure, gesturing for us to enter. I exchanged a glance with Morgan, seeing my own combination of fear and fascination reflected in her eyes. Then, together, we ducked through the entrance. The interior was dimly lit by more of the bioluminescent fungi, cultivated in strategic locations to provide ambient light. The space was circular, about 20 feet across, with a packed earth floor covered in woven grass mats. Around the perimeter were various objects, what appeared to be crude tools, bundles of dried plants, containers made from hollowed gourds and wood. And in the center, seated cross-legged on a raised platform of flat stones, was Michael Wells. He looked surprisingly calm, his earlier mania replaced by a serene, almost meditative state. Beside him sat another creature, this one notably different from those we'd seen before. It was old, ancient by the look of it, smaller than the others, perhaps due to age-related stoop with fur that had gone completely white. But its eyes were clear and alert, studying us with unnerving intelligence as we entered. "Michael," I said carefully, "are you all right?" He looked up, recognition dawning on his face. "Ranger Bennett, Dr. Chen, you came?" His voice was calm, rational. "I hoped you would." "What's happening here, Michael?" Morgan asked, keeping her voice gentle. "What is this place?" "A sanctuary," he replied. "Perhaps the last one. And this," he gestured to the white-furred creature beside him, "is the eldest, the keeper of their history." The aged creature made a soft vocalization, different from what we'd heard before, almost musical in quality. "It's trying to speak to us," Morgan said. Wells shook his head. "Not trying. Succeeding, but in a language no human has spoken for thousands of years. The eldest is very old, older than any of us can comprehend. It remembers when our kinds lived side by side, when we shared a common tongue." "That's impossible," I objected. "No primate can live that long." "Not a single individual, no," Wells agreed. "But memory can be passed down generation to generation, preserved intact through oral tradition. The eldest carries the memories of all the eldest's before it, back to the beginning." Morgan had moved closer to the white-furred creature, fascination overcoming caution. "This is extraordinary. An unknown hominid species with language, social structure, and cultural memory transmission." The eldest made another series of sounds, and to my shock, Wells responded with similar vocalizations, crude and halting, but recognizably attempting the same patterns. "You understand it?" I asked incredulously. "Not fully, but enough. It's been teaching me, showing me things." Wells tapped his temple. "In here, images, memories. I didn't like where this was going." "Michael, I think you need medical attention. You've been through a traumatic experience." "No," he interrupted firmly. "I was confused before, yes, overwhelmed by the initial contact. But I'm thinking clearly now. What the eldest has shown me is real." "What has it shown you?" Morgan asked, kneeling beside him on the stone platform. Wells looked at her, then at me, his expression grave. "Their history, their decline. They were once numerous, living throughout these mountains and beyond. But as humans expanded their territory, these beings retreated to more remote areas. Generation by generation, their numbers dwindled. Now this is the last colony. Perhaps 100 individuals struggling to maintain their way of life in secret." "If that's true, it's a major scientific discovery," Morgan said. "We need to document this, bring in experts." "No." Wells's vehemence startled us. "That's exactly what they fear. Once their existence is proven, this valley would be overrun. Researchers, media, tourists, their sanctuary would be destroyed. They'd be captured, studied, displayed in zoos." The white-furred eldest made a low, mournful sound, as if understanding Wells's words. "Then why show themselves to us at all?" I asked. "Why bring us here if they want to remain hidden?" "Because they're dying out," Wells said simply. "And they don't want to disappear without anyone knowing they existed. They want witnesses, a few trusted humans who can remember them after they're gone, who can perhaps help protect this valley, keep it secret but preserved." Morgan looked troubled. "As a scientist, I have an obligation to report significant discoveries. And as humans, we have an obligation to respect their right to exist on their own terms," Wells countered. "They're intelligent beings with their own society and culture. They deserve the dignity of choosing their own fate." I was conflicted. As a park ranger, I had responsibilities to report unusual activity in my jurisdiction, to ensure public safety. But I also had a deep respect for the wilderness and its inhabitants. If these creatures truly were as intelligent as they seemed, didn't they have rights we should consider? The silverback who had guided us entered the structure, carrying something wrapped in leaves. It approached us slowly and carefully, unwrapped its bundle to reveal a collection of small objects. A pocket watch, a compass, pieces of jewelry, old coins, fragments of photographs protected in crude containers made of tree resin. Artifacts, Morgan breathed, from humans who came before us. Remembrances, Wells corrected. Mementos of those they've encountered over centuries. Some given freely, others taken from those who didn't survive their encounters. The implication hung heavy in the air. These creatures had a history with humans, not all of it peaceful. The eldest made a series of complex vocalizations, gesturing at the artifacts and then at us. It's asking for something from us, Wells translated haltingly. A token of remembrance, something personal. Morgan didn't hesitate. She removed a simple bracelet of braided leather from her wrist and placed it carefully among the other items. After a moment's consideration, I added my ranger badge. Not my official one, but the commemorative one I'd received when completing training, which I kept as a good luck charm. The eldest made a sound that somehow conveyed approval, then carefully rewrapped the artifacts and handed them to the silverback. "There's something else," Wells said, his expression growing more serious. "The main reason they brought us here. They need our help." "What kind of help?" I asked cautiously. "Protection. For this valley and for them. Human encroachment is increasing. Hikers straying into their territory, development pushing closer to the forest boundaries, and recently, a new threat." "What threat?" Wells exchanged vocalizations with the eldest, then turned back to us. "A group of humans has been hunting them, deliberately tracking and killing them, taking bodies or parts as trophies. 5 of their kind have been killed in the past year alone." Morgan looked horrified. "Poachers?" "Trophy hunters," Wells corrected grimly. "People who've heard the legends and want to be the ones to bring proof to the world. They use advanced technology, thermal imaging, drones, high-powered rifles with night scopes. The colony can't defend against those." I felt sick. The idea of someone deliberately hunting these intelligent beings for sport or fame was repugnant. "Have you seen any evidence of these hunters?" "No, but I believe them. Why would they lie?" Wells gestured around the cavern. "Look at what they've built here, what they've preserved. They're not mindless animals. They're a people fighting for survival." The eldest rose to its feet with surprising grace for its apparent age. It approached me directly, stopping just a foot away, its eyes, deep amber with flecks of green, holding mine. Then it slowly reached out and placed one long-fingered hand against my chest, directly over my heart. The gesture was unmistakable in its meaning, a connection, an appeal to my humanity. I didn't move, allowing the contact, and something passed between us in that moment. Not telepathy or anything supernatural, but a profound understanding that transcended language. This being was asking for my help, one sentient creature to another. When it withdrew its hand, I knew what I had to do. "I'll help," I said simply. "I don't know exactly how yet, but I'll do what I can to protect this valley and its inhabitants." Morgan nodded firmly. "So will I." The eldest made a sound that needed no translation. Gratitude and relief combined. Wells smiled for the first time since we'd found him. "Thank you, both of you. I knew you would understand once you saw this place, once you met them. But we need to go back," I said. "The evacuation team will be at our camp by now, and if we don't return, they'll send a search party. That would lead more humans directly here." Wells looked reluctant, but nodded. "You're right. We should go." He turned to the eldest and made several vocalizations, apparently explaining our departure. The ancient being responded with what seemed to be agreement, then made a gesture toward the entrance. The silverback appeared as if summoned and prepared to guide us back. As we made ready to leave, I turned to Wells. "Michael, you should come with us. You need medical attention, and your tour group is worried sick." He hesitated, looking back at the eldest. "I want to stay longer, learn more of their language, their history." There will be time for that later, Morgan assured him. But right now, we need to establish a plan to protect them. And we can't do that if we're all declared missing and the forest is crawled with search parties. Eventually he agreed, though with obvious reluctance. As we left the central structure, the other creatures of the colony gathered to watch our departure, maintaining a respectful distance, but clearly curious about the humans in their midst. Our silver-backed guide led us back through the tunnel system to the surface, moving with surprising speed and agility for its size. The journey seemed shorter on the return, perhaps because we now knew what to expect, or perhaps because our guide knew shortcuts we'd missed on our own. When we emerged from the cave into daylight, I was shocked to see how much time had passed. The sun was already past its zenith. We'd spent nearly 6 hours in the underground village. The evacuation team will definitely be searching for us by now, I said, checking my watch. We need to move quickly. We made good time back through the valley and up the ridge, our guide leaving us at the forest edge with a final vocalization that sounded almost like a farewell. As we continued toward camp, Wells filled us in on more of what he'd learned during his time with the creatures. Their dietary habits, omnivorous, with a preference for fish and berries, their social structure, family-based groups within the larger colony, and their name for themselves, which he pronounced as something like Ketuwa. It means the people of the forest, he explained. At least that's as close as I can translate it. When we finally reached the clearing where our camp had been, we found it transformed into a search and rescue operation base. 2 Park Service vehicles, an ambulance, and several people in uniform moving about purposefully. Jamie spotted us first, rushing over with a mix of relief and concern. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "They've had teams searching for hours." "It's a long story," I replied. "One we need to be careful about sharing." Diane Rodriguez approached, her expression shifting from professional concern to irritation when she saw us. "Bennett, what the hell is going on? You were supposed to check in hourly." "Lost radio contact in the ravine," I lied smoothly. "We found Mr. Wells wandering in the forest, disoriented. He needs medical attention." The paramedics took over, leading Wells to the ambulance to check his vital signs and general condition. As they worked, Diane pulled me aside. "What really happened out there? Jamie's been telling some pretty wild stories about creatures in the forest." I shot Jamie a warning look, which he at least had the grace to appear sheepish about. "We encountered some unusual wildlife, yes. Large predators, possibly bears, behaving abnormally. I'll file a full report once we're back at headquarters." She didn't look convinced, but nodded. "I'll expect that report on my desk tomorrow morning. And Bennett? Whatever's going on, remember your primary responsibility is public safety. If there's a threat in these woods, we need to know about it." "Understood," I said, knowing I was committing to a complicated path ahead. I would need to find a way to protect both the public and the extraordinary beings we'd discovered, goals that might soon come into conflict. As the paramedics prepared to transport Wells, Morgan and I had a moment alone with him. "What do we tell them?" Morgan asked quietly. "About what we saw?" Wells looked between us, his expression somber. "The truth would endanger them, but a complete lie serves no one." "A middle path, then," I suggested. "We report unusual animal activity in the eastern forest, recommend restricting access to certain areas for further study, but keep the details vague. No mention of intelligent hominids or underground villages." "And the hunters?" Morgan pressed. "We need to stop them." "I'll work with Joseph Redhorn," I said. "The tribal council already considers that area sacred and restricted. If we coordinate with them, we might be able to increase patrols and monitoring without drawing attention to exactly what we're protecting." Wells nodded. "That could work. The colony has survived this long by remaining legend rather than fact. Perhaps that's still their best protection." As they loaded him into the ambulance, he caught my arm. "You'll go back? Check on them?" "Yes," I promised, "but carefully and not too often. We can't risk leading others to them." He seemed satisfied with that and released my arm as the paramedics closed the ambulance doors. Morgan came to stand beside me as the vehicles prepared to depart. "So that's it? We just keep their secret?" "For now," I said, watching the ambulance drive away with Wells inside. "Until we figure out a better solution. one that protects them while respecting what they are. "And what are they exactly?" she asked quietly. "In your professional opinion?" I thought about the underground village, the artifacts collected over centuries, the ancient being who carried generations of memories. "I don't know that science has a name for them yet, but they're people, in all the ways that matter, different from us, but people nonetheless." Morgan nodded, her expression a mix of wonder and resolve. "People with a right to exist on their own terms." Exactly. I looked toward the eastern forest, where shadows were lengthening as afternoon turned toward evening. "And we're going to help them do just that." As the last vehicle disappeared down the service road, leaving us to gather the remaining research equipment, I couldn't shake the feeling that our discovery had irrevocably changed something. Not just our understanding of the natural world, but our place within it. The forest had kept its secret for thousands of years. Now that secret was in our hands, a responsibility I wasn't sure any human was truly prepared to bear. 3 months passed. Spring turned to summer, and the Shadow Woods National Forest transformed with the season. Meadows bursting with wildflowers, streams running clear and cold with snowmelt from the high peaks, wildlife abundant and active in the lengthening days. I settled back into my routine at the ranger station, though nothing felt quite routine anymore. Not since that day in the underground village, not since meeting the beings we now cautiously referred to as the Ketu-Wa when speaking privately among the small circle who knew the truth. Morgan had returned to her university position but maintained regular contact, using her academic credentials to quietly establish a research reserve in the eastern forest. The official purpose was to study rare fungi species found in the cave systems, but the real goal was to create a buffer zone around the Ketu-Wa territory, an area where human access would be strictly limited and monitored. Michael Wells had recovered fully from his ordeal, though doctors remained puzzled by his temporary psychosis. After debriefing sessions with park officials, where he carefully omitted any mention of intelligent forest beings, he'd returned to Australia. We exchanged occasional emails, careful to use coded language when discussing the colony. His ability to communicate with them, limited as it was, remained unique among us, and I sometimes wondered what else they had shared with him that he hadn't revealed. Joseph Redhorn had proven an invaluable ally. Once I cautiously confirmed what he had long suspected about the forest's inhabitants. He'd worked with the tribal council to expand protections for the sacred lands around Dakota. Traditional boundary markers were reinforced, and tribal members increased their presence in the border areas, gently but firmly redirecting hikers who strayed too close. As for me, I'd made only 2 brief return visits to the valley since our discovery. Both times I'd been greeted by the silverback at the forest edge and escorted to a meeting place well away from the cave entrance. A clear indication that, while I was considered an ally, access to their home would be granted sparingly. I respected their caution. It had, after all, kept them safe for generations. During these visits, I'd confirmed that the colony remained secure and relayed reports from our efforts to protect their territory. No words were exchanged. My rudimentary attempts at their vocalizations proved embarrassingly inadequate. But understanding passed between us nonetheless, aided by gestures and drawings in the dirt. On my last visit, the silverback had presented me with a small token, a perfectly rounded stone pendant on a cord of woven plant fibers. I wore it now beneath my ranger uniform, a reminder of the promise I'd made. These thoughts occupied me as I made my evening patrol around Wakanda Lake, checking camping permits and reminding visitors about fire safety in the summer drought conditions. It was routine work, but I found new meaning in protecting this wilderness that sheltered such extraordinary secrets. I was just finishing my rounds when my radio crackled to life. "Bennett, you there? Over?" It was Diane's voice, tense with something that immediately put me on alert. "Copy, Diane. What's up?" "Got a situation developing near the eastern boundary. Reports of gunshots, at least 3, in the restricted research area. Peterson is checking it out from the north access road. Can you approach from your position?" My blood ran cold. Gunshots in the restricted area could only mean one thing. The hunters that Wells had warned us about had returned. On my way, ETA 20 minutes. Any other details? Report came from hikers on the Ridge Trail. They heard the shots and saw what they described as a large animal running through the trees. Couldn't identify it specifically. Copy that. I'll report when I reach the area. Over. I hurried back to my vehicle, adrenaline pumping. If poachers were hunting in the Ketuwa territory, every minute counted. As I drove toward the eastern boundary, I placed a quick call to Joseph on my personal phone, leaving a coded message about boundary issues that he would understand. The sun was setting by the time I reached the access point closest to where the gunshots had been reported. I parked, checked my equipment, including the sidearm I now carried with a new sense of purpose, and set off along the narrow trail that marked the edge of the restricted area. Moving quickly but quietly through the deepening twilight, I scanned for any sign of intruders. About half a mile in, I found the first evidence. Fresh ATV tracks cutting directly across the boundary into the restricted zone, accompanied by heavy boot prints. At least 2 individuals, maybe more. I radioed the information to Diane and continued following the tracks, my senses hyper-alert. The forest was unusually quiet. No birds calling, no small animals rustling in the undergrowth. The same unnatural silence I'd experienced during my previous encounters with the Ketuwa. The tracks led steadily eastward, deeper into the protected zone, heading with disturbing purpose toward the valley. These weren't casual trespassers. They knew where they were going. As darkness fell completely, I switched to my night vision equipment, standard issue for rangers in remote areas, but something I'd rarely used before my discovery of the colony. Now it seemed an essential tool for my self-appointed role as guardian. Through the green-tinted view of the night vision goggles, I spotted something reflective ahead. Shell casings on the forest floor, 3 of them, confirming the reported gunshots. Beside them, something that turned my stomach. Drops of dark fluid that could only be blood, leading away in a direction different from the boot prints. I was facing a choice. Follow the hunters or track the potentially wounded Ketuwa. The ranger protocol was clear: pursue the lawbreakers. But my promise to the colony weighed heavily. Before I could decide, a sound reached me from ahead, a vehicle engine starting up, followed by the distinctive whine of ATVs moving rapidly away. The hunters were leaving, perhaps satisfied with whatever they'd accomplished. My decision was made. I moved quickly along the blood trail, hoping it would lead to a Ketuwa I could help, rather than a body I would have to bury. The drops became more frequent as I continued, indicating a significant injury. After about a quarter mile, the blood trail led to a thicket of dense undergrowth. From within came a sound that confirmed my fears, the pain breathing of a large creature trying to remain silent and failing. "I'm here to help," I called softly, unsure if the injured being could understand me, but hoping my tone would convey my intentions. "It's me, the ranger from the lake." A low growl responded, not threatening but acknowledging. I approached carefully, parting the branches to find one of the younger Ketuwa males curled against the base of a large tree, one hand pressed to its shoulder, where dark blood seeped between massive fingers. "Let me see," I said gently, setting down my pack and removing the first aid kit I always carried. "I can help." The creature watched me warily, but didn't resist as I moved closer and gently moved its hand from the wound. The injury was clear in the night vision. A bullet had torn through the flesh of its upper arm, missing bone but causing significant blood loss. Working quickly, I cleaned and bandaged the wound as best I could with the supplies I had. The Ketuwa remained stoically silent throughout the process, only occasionally making soft sounds of pain when I had to apply pressure to stop the bleeding. When I finished, I offered my water bottle, which it accepted with what seemed like gratitude, drinking deeply before handing it back with surprising gentleness for such a powerful being. "Can you walk?" I asked, miming standing and moving. "We need to get you somewhere safer." It seemed to understand, struggling to its feet with my help. Standing, it towered over me but leaned heavily against the tree, clearly weakened by blood loss. My radio crackled, making us both start. "Bennett, report status. Over." I stepped away slightly before responding. "Still tracking the intruders. Found shell casings and evidence they may have shot at wildlife. No sign of the suspects currently. Over." Peterson found their exit point on the north boundary. 2 ATVs loaded something large onto them. They were gone before he could intercept. We're setting up roadblocks on all exit routes from the forest. Copy that. I'll continue searching the area for injured wildlife or additional evidence. Over. After signing off, I returned to the wounded K2wa. We need to move. Can you make it to the valley? Your people can help you there. It made a negative gesture, pointing deeper into the forest but away from the valley's direction. You want to go somewhere else? I asked, confused. It nodded, then made a series of gestures, pointing to its wound, then making a circular motion with its finger around its temple. Understanding dawned. The hunters. You want to show me something about them? Another nod, followed by an urgent tugging on my sleeve. All right, I agreed. Lead the way, but slowly. You're in no condition to rush. We moved through the forest at a careful pace, the K2wa occasionally stopping to rest against a tree. Despite its injury, it navigated with confidence, clearly familiar with this territory. After about 20 minutes, we approached a small clearing I'd never seen before. The K2wa gestured for me to stop and be quiet, then pointed toward the far side of the open space. Through my night vision, I could make out a simple structure, a hunting blind constructed from local materials, but with additions of camouflage netting and what appeared to be modern game cameras mounted on nearby trees. This was no temporary hunting position, it was a permanent observation post. I signaled the K2wa to stay put, then moved carefully around the perimeter of the clearing for a closer look. The blind showed signs of regular use: food wrappers, cigarette butts, even a logbook and a waterproof case attached to one wall. Quickly photographing everything with my phone, I examined the logbook. It contained dates, times, and cryptic notations. S3 observed at creek, adult male, approx. 7.5 feet, and juvenile pair at NE quadrant, unsuccessful pursuit. These hunters weren't random thrill seekers, they were organized, methodical, and had been studying the K2wa for months. The realization sent ice through my veins. This was a far more serious threat than we'd anticipated. I rejoined the wounded being, who had slumped to the ground, its breathing more labored now. The exertion of the journey had taken its toll. We need to get you to your people, I insisted, helping it to its feet. I've seen enough here. It didn't resist this time, allowing me to support some of its weight as we began the longer journey toward the valley. Progress was slow, and I worried about the blood loss weakening it further, but its determination was evident in every painful step. We had covered perhaps half the distance when a sound froze us both in place. Voices, human voices, approaching from ahead. I'm telling you, I hit it solid, a man's voice carried through the darkness. Trail leads this way. We should have finished it, a second voice responded. Haskins won't be happy with just blood samples and hair. Tracker says it's heading back to the nesting area. We'll get another shot tomorrow when it's weaker. They were coming back, and we were directly in their path. The wounded K2wa tensed beside me, a low growl building in its chest. No, I whispered urgently. Too dangerous. They're armed. Making a quick decision, I guided the creature off the path into dense undergrowth. Stay here, I instructed with gestures. I'll handle this. Removing my night vision goggles and switching on my standard flashlight, I stepped back onto the path and walked confidently toward the approaching voices, my ranger badge prominently displayed. Park Service? I called out. Stop where you are and identify yourselves. The voices immediately fell silent, followed by the sound of movement. They were trying to conceal themselves or retreat. This is Ranger Bennett, I continued, sweeping my light through the trees. You are in a restricted research area. Identify yourselves immediately. For a moment I thought they might flee, but then 2 figures reluctantly stepped into my light's beam. Men in their 30s, dressed in expensive hunting gear, looking both annoyed and wary. Evening, Ranger, the taller one said with forced casualness. We were just doing some night hiking. Got a bit turned around. Night hiking with rifles? I challenged, noting the gun cases they'd ineffectively tried to conceal behind their backs. In a clearly marked restricted area? Let me see some ID. They exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Finally, the shorter man produced a wallet and handed over a driver's license. Look, there's been a misunderstanding. We thought this was public access land. The license identified him as James Morton from Seattle. I memorized the details before handing it back. And your friend? The taller man reluctantly provided his ID. Peter Vasquez, also from Seattle. Well, Mr. Morton, Mr. Vasquez, you're about 4 miles inside a restricted research zone. There are signs posted every quarter-mile along the boundary. Kind of hard to miss. Like I said, we got turned around, Morton insisted, though his eyes darted nervously to the dense undergrowth where I'd hidden the wounded K2A. What's in the cases? I asked, gesturing to their rifle bags. Just hunting equipment, Vasquez replied smoothly. We didn't realize this was a no-hunting zone. All hunting in this national forest requires permits, which are checked at entry points, I said, my tone hardening. Neither of you presented permits at any checkpoint, and you're carrying what appear to be high-powered rifles in a restricted research area where gunshots were reported less than 2 hours ago. They exchanged another glance, their casual facade slipping. Look, officer, Ranger, I corrected, Ranger, Vasquez continued. We made a mistake. We'll leave right now, no harm done. I'm afraid it's not that simple. I need to inspect your weapons and equipment, and you'll need to accompany me back to headquarters to file an incident report. I kept my voice authoritative while listening for any sound from the hidden K2A. There have been reports of poaching in this area. Morton's expression darkened. You don't have the authority to search us without cause. Trespassing in a restricted area, reports of gunfire, and unauthorized weapons constitute plenty of cause, I countered. Now open the cases, please. For a tense moment, I thought they might refuse or even become hostile. Then Morton sighed dramatically and unzipped his rifle case, revealing an expensive hunting rifle with a night vision scope and silencer attachment illegal equipment in national forests. That's a federal violation, I said, mentally cataloging the evidence. The silencer alone carries serious penalties. It's not what you think, Vasquez began, but fell silent when a soft sound came from the undergrowth. The injured K2A shifting position. Morton's head snapped toward the noise. What was that? Probably a deer, I said casually, stepping to block his view. This forest is full of wildlife, which is why it's protected. Now your case too, sir. Vasquez reluctantly revealed similar illegal equipment. As I documented the violations with my phone's camera, I radioed headquarters. This is Bennett. I've intercepted 2 individuals with illegal hunting equipment in the restricted zone, requesting backup for transport to headquarters for processing. Over. Copy that, Diane responded. Peterson is already in your vicinity. What's your exact location? I provided coordinates, keeping my position between the hunters and the hidden K2A. Suspects are cooperative at this time. ETA for backup. Approximately 15 minutes. Maintain position. Over. As I pocketed my radio, Morton made one last attempt. Listen, Ranger, maybe we can work something out. This doesn't have to go on record. Are you attempting to bribe a federal officer? I asked coldly, because that would add another charge to the growing list. He backed down immediately. No, just suggesting there might be a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding was yours in thinking you could hunt protected species in a national forest. I gestured for them to sit on a fallen log. We'll wait here for my colleague. The next 15 minutes passed in tense silence. The hunters occasionally exchanged glances, clearly calculating their options, while I maintained vigilance, acutely aware of the wounded K2A hiding just yards away. Finally, the welcome sound of approaching footsteps announced Ranger Peterson's arrival. After briefly explaining the situation, I helped him secure the suspects and their equipment for transport back to headquarters. I'm going to stay and check for any injured wildlife, I told Peterson. These shots were fired at something. He nodded, understanding the protocol. Radio when you're heading back. Don't stay out too late, storm's coming in. As soon as Peterson and the hunters were out of sight, I hurried back to the hidden K2A. It had weakened considerably during the wait, its breathing shallow and skin pallid beneath the fur. Hold on, I urged, helping it to its feet. We need to get you home now. Supporting much of its weight, I guided the creature toward the valley as quickly as its condition allowed. The journey was arduous, each step clearly painful for my companion, but its determination never wavered. As we neared the valley rim, a familiar figure emerged from the trees, the silver-backed elder, accompanied by two younger males. They rushed forward, taking the wounded one from me with gentle efficiency, communicating in those complex vocalizations I still couldn't understand. The elder turned to me, making gestures of gratitude before pointing questioningly in the direction from which we'd come. "The hunters are gone," I assured him, miming handcuffs. "Captured, but there are more." I held up my phone with the photographs of the hunting blind. "They're organized, dangerous." The elder studied the images, a low growl building in his chest. Then he made a decisive gesture and motioned for me to follow, as the others carried the wounded Ketuwa down into the valley. We descended the now familiar path to the cave entrance, the elder insisting I continue when I hesitated at the threshold. Something had changed. There was a new urgency in his manner, a decision reached. Inside the underground village, the community was in visible distress. Small groups huddled together, mothers clutching youngsters close, sentries positioned at key points throughout the cavern. The wounded one was being tended by others with poultices of chewed plants and wrappings of soft moss. The elder led me directly to the central structure where I had first met the ancient white-furred eldest. Inside, the atmosphere was solemn. The eldest sat in the same position as before, but appeared more frail, the white fur thinner, the eyes clouded with age but still penetrating. Other elders were gathered as well, a council of sorts, I realized. They had been in discussion before our arrival, evidenced by the agitated state of the group. The silverback explained our presence through vocalizations and gestures, showing the hunters blind in my photographs. The council responded with what could only be described as grave concern, several members making aggressive gestures of protection. The eldest made a soft vocalization, and immediately the others fell silent. It gestured for me to approach, which I did, kneeling respectfully before the ancient being. With deliberate movements, it reached out and placed one gnarled hand on my forehead, the touch feather-light but somehow weighty with importance. It held this position for several long moments, its eyes locked with mine, communicating something profound that transcended our language barrier. When it finally withdrew its hand, the eldest made a series of slow, measured vocalizations to the council. The reaction was immediate: surprise, some objections, but ultimately acquiescence to whatever had been decreed. The silverback turned to me, his expression solemn. Through gestures and rudimentary drawings in the dirt floor, he began to convey their decision. The colony was relocating. They had known for some time that human encroachment was making their current home increasingly unsafe, but the organized hunting expeditions had forced their hand. They would move deeper into the mountains, to caverns the silverback indicated were many days' journey away, known only to their eldest members. But they needed time and protection to complete the migration safely, particularly for the youngest and oldest members who could not move quickly or defend themselves. I understood now why I had been brought into the council. They were asking for my help, for me to be their guardian during this vulnerable transition. I nodded solemnly, pointing to myself and miming standing guard. "I'll help. I'll protect you." The relief in the room was palpable. The silverback clasped my shoulder in gratitude, and even the eldest made a sound that seemed to convey approval. Over the next hour, through painstaking communication of drawings and gestures, we formulated a plan. The colony would move in stages over the course of a month, using hidden routes through the mountains. I would coordinate with Joseph Redhorn to establish a monitoring network around their territory, using the tribal members' knowledge of the land to create a buffer zone that would detect any approaching hunters. Meanwhile, Morgan's research reserve provided the perfect cover. The increased official presence would deter casual intruders, while the limited access protocols would keep legitimate researchers from stumbling upon the migration. As our planning concluded, the eldest made one final gesture. It removed a small leather pouch from around its neck and handed it to me. Inside was a carved stone figurine, ancient beyond reckoning, depicting one of their kind standing beside a human, hands clasped in what could only be interpreted as alliance. The message was clear. This was not the first time their people and mine had worked together. This bond had existed before, in times long forgotten by human history, but preserved in the Ketua's oral tradition. I accepted the gift with reverence, understanding its significance. "I'll honor this trust," I promised, though I knew the eldest couldn't understand my words. But perhaps it understood my heart, nodding slowly before gesturing that our council was concluded. As the silverback escorted me back to the surface, the full weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders. I was now the guardian of an ancient secret, protector of beings that existed beyond the boundaries of known science, keeper of a trust that stretched back to the dawn of human history. The weeks that followed tested that commitment in ways I never anticipated. The hunters, Morton and Vasquez, were prosecuted for weapons violations and trespassing. But without evidence of what they had been hunting, they received only minimal sentences and fines. More concerning was their connection to a wealthy collector named Haskins, whom they refused to fully identify, someone financing expeditions to capture proof of the forest people's existence. Working with Joseph, Morgan, and a small circle of trusted allies, we established a protective network around the Ketuwa territory. Tribal members patrolled the boundaries, while Morgan's research team maintained a visible scientific presence that discouraged unauthorized entry. I coordinated it all, spending long nights monitoring the forest, intercepting would-be intruders, and escorting vulnerable groups of Ketuwa to their new home. It was during one such escort, 3 weeks into the migration, that we faced the greatest threat. I was guiding a group that included several elders and young ones through a narrow mountain pass when we encountered them. Haskins and his new team of hunters, heavily armed and equipped with thermal imaging equipment. The confrontation that followed tested every skill I possessed as a ranger and every commitment I'd made as a guardian. In the end, it was the forest itself that saved us, a sudden summer storm providing cover for our escape, while a strategically triggered rockslide blocked the hunters' pursuit. Haskins escaped, but his equipment and evidence were destroyed. The message was clear: the forest protected its own, and I was now counted among them. By the autumn equinox, the migration was complete. The Ketuwa were established in their new home, deep in the mountainous wilderness where human feet rarely tread. The old valley returned to natural silence, with only a few deliberately placed artifacts suggesting it had ever been inhabited at all. To the outside world, the eastern forest returned to its normal status. The research reserve concluded its official work, and Shadow Woods National Forest continued its slow seasonal changes. Reports of strange sightings diminished, then stopped entirely. The legend of the forest people remained just that, a local myth, a campfire story, nothing more. But on quiet nights when I sit on my cabin porch overlooking Wakanda Lake, I sometimes hear them, distant calls echoing from the high peaks, voices of the Ketuwa communicating across valleys. And occasionally, when the moon is new and the forest dark, a silhouette appears at the edge of the clearing. The silverback, come to share news or simply to maintain our connection. On those nights, I venture into the trees, where we sit in companionable silence beneath the stars. No words pass between us, none are needed. We are guardians of the same secret, protectors of the same wilderness, bound by a promise older than either of our kinds can remember. And when hikers or campers ask me if I've ever seen anything strange in Shadow Woods, I smile and tell them only this: the forest keeps its secrets well, and those who listen closely might hear whispers of stories untold in the rustling leaves and ancient pines. Some secrets, after all, are meant to be kept, for in this vast wilderness, we are never truly alone. Eyes watch from the shadows, ancient and knowing. The Ketuwa remain, hidden beyond human sight but ever present in the deep woods, a testament to mysteries that still exist in our too-certain world. And I remain their guardian, their human ally, keeper of their story. This is my purpose now. This is my promise. In the Shadow Woods, where reality and legend blur like mist among the trees, I have found my true calling, not just as a ranger of the land, but as a guardian of its most extraordinary inhabitants. For here, in the silence of ancient forests, I learned the most important lesson of all. The greatest mysteries are not those waiting to be discovered, but those worthy of being protected. The winds of change swept through my life unexpectedly that spring. After years trapped in a suffocating corporate job in Seattle, the ranger position in Alaska's Kuskokwim Valley felt like salvation. My grandparents had met in these forests decades ago. My grandmother, descended from Yup'ik healers, and my grandfather, a forestry scientist from Montana. When the posting appeared, it seemed written specifically for me. I adopted my grandmother's surname, Akiak, meaning brave in Yup'ik. A new identity for a new beginning. The Park Service welcomed me with minimal fanfare. Just a brief orientation, keys to an isolated cabin, and a territory spanning nearly 300 square miles of pristine wilderness to monitor. Most rangers last 2 seasons at most, my supervisor Donovan remarked during my orientation, studying me with weathered eyes. The isolation gets to them. Make sure you're ready for what that means. I nodded confidently, though uncertainty gnawed at my edges. My cabin sat nestled between towering pines, overlooking Midnight Lake. Named for waters so still and dark they reflected starlight like a perfect mirror. Solar panels provided limited electricity, a wood stove for heat, satellite phone for emergencies, radio for daily check-ins. My first week passed uneventfully. I documented wildlife sightings, cleared fallen trees from trails, and explored my territory meticulously, mapping mental landmarks. The solitude felt cleansing after years of crowded city life. That changed on my 8th night. I'd settled into an evening ritual, coffee on the porch as dusk transformed the forest. The lake surface reflected the dying light when I noticed the silence. Complete, absolute silence. No birds, no insects. No rustling leaves despite the light breeze. A crushing sensation of being watched pressed down on me. My eyes scanned the tree line, finding nothing but deepening shadows. Yet something felt profoundly wrong. Minutes passed before a distant crack echoed, like a tree being snapped, not falling naturally. Then another, then 3 in rapid succession, each sound closer than the last. I retreated inside, double-checking the locks. That night I dreamed of massive footprints in mud, each the size of my torso, leading toward my cabin. Morning brought normalcy. Birds sang, squirrels chattered. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the entire episode until I spotted the tracks, massive depressions in the soft earth near my woodpile. Each impression nearly 17 inches long, with distinct toe marks unlike any bear or moose I'd documented. Protocol demanded I report unusual findings. When I radioed headquarters, Donovan's response surprised me. "File it as unidentified wildlife activity," he said flatly. "We get reports like this every season." "Shouldn't we investigate?" I pressed. A long pause followed. "Akiak, some things in these forests stay unexplained. Mark your calendar each time it happens. If frequency increases, we'll discuss further steps." His vague response unsettled me more than the footprints. I photographed them, measured their dimensions, and created a plaster cast before rain could destroy the evidence. That night I secured every window, placing my hunting knife beside my bed. As darkness fell, the forest went silent again. I waited, listening intently as hours crawled by. Just after midnight, heavy footsteps circled my cabin, slow, deliberate circles. Whatever made them weight enough to make the porch timbers creak beneath its bulk. I sat frozen, clutching my knife as something large scraped against my door, not knocking, but testing its strength. The handle jiggled slightly, my breath caught in my throat. 3 hours it circled, 3 hours of pacing, testing, waiting. When dawn broke, I found deep gouges in my door and windowsills. Something had tried methodically to enter every potential access point. I was being hunted in my own sanctuary. 2 weeks passed without incident. I began questioning my sanity, wondering if isolation had already begun affecting my mind. The plaster casts and photographs provided my only proof something had occurred at all. Early May brought the season's first serious rescue operation. A family of 4 had ventured off trail, becoming hopelessly lost as weather deteriorated. Their emergency beacon activated near Raven's Ridge, approximately 7 miles from my cabin. I gathered supplies and headed out immediately. Spring storms in Alaska arrive without warning, and temperatures would drop dangerously after sunset. The coordinates led me through increasingly dense forest, until I reached a steep ravine where the family huddled beneath a makeshift shelter, parents and 2 children, the youngest barely 6. "Thank God you're here," the father said, relief washing over his exhausted face. "We've been terrified since yesterday." "Since yesterday?" I questioned, checking my watch. "Your beacon only activated 3 hours ago." The mother pulled her children closer. "That's impossible. We've been pressing that button since we heard the noises yesterday afternoon." I helped them gather their scattered belongings. "What noises?" The older child, perhaps 10, spoke up. "The screaming, and something walking around our tent all night. Dad thought it was a bear, but bears don't stand up and look through the top of your tent." My skin prickled. "How tall would you say this bear was?" The parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. "At least 8 feet, the father finally admitted. "It ripped our food bag from a branch 15 feet high without climbing. Just reached up and took it. But it didn't leave after finding the food. It stayed watching us." The youngest pointed to the tree line. "It's still watching now." I turned slowly, scanning where she indicated. Nothing moved, yet the forest had gone preternaturally quiet. The hair on my neck stood on end. "We need to move quickly," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Follow exactly in my footsteps. Stay close." We'd covered perhaps 2 miles when I noticed our path blocked by a massive deadfall that hadn't been there during my approach. 3 enormous trees lay perfectly aligned across the trail, not fallen naturally, but deliberately placed. "Is there another way?" the mother whispered. I checked my map. "Yes, but it adds 3 miles through difficult terrain." "Look," the older child whispered, pointing to the forest floor. Scattered along our intended detour route were bones, dozens of them. Small animal remains precisely arranged in a line, creating an arrow pointing in the opposite direction. "Someone's messing with us," the father insisted, voice cracking. I made a decision. "We're climbing over the deadfall. It's the fastest way back." As I helped the family over the massive logs, I spotted deep claw marks scoring the trunks. Not made by bears. More like massive fingers had dug into the wood, leaving grooves large enough to slide my hand into. The deadfall marked a boundary. Once across, birds resumed singing. The oppressive feeling of being watched lifted slightly. We reached my cabin by dusk. After feeding the family and radioing for evacuation, I secured the perimeter. The father pulled me aside before the helicopter arrived. "The rangers who worked this area before, where are they now?" I hesitated. "Transferred to different parks." He leaned closer. "All of them? Or just the ones who survived?" Before I could answer, the distinctive thump of helicopter blades approached. The family boarded quickly, the parents avoiding eye contact as they thanked me. After they departed, I reviewed my log entries. Something about their story nagged at me. I checked the emergency beacon activation records. The family's beacon had indeed been triggered multiple times over 36 hours, but signals only reached headquarters today. Something had been blocking their transmission, something that wanted them isolated in its territory. That night, my radio crackled with static at precisely 1:17 a.m. Through the interference, I made out a single word, spoken in a voice too deep to be human. "Mine." After the incident with the lost family, I couldn't shake my growing unease. Something intelligent stalked these woods, something that understood emergency beacons, territorial boundaries, and how to manipulate its environment to isolate prey. I needed information. The next morning, I radioed headquarters requesting historical incident reports for my sector. Donovan seemed reluctant, but eventually agreed to send digital copies of the previous 5 years' documentation. While waiting, I hiked to where I'd found the family. The deadfall remained, but something had disturbed the scene. The bones were gone, and fresh deposits of scat, larger than any bears, marked the area. Most disturbing were the partial footprints, the same 17-inch impressions I'd found near my cabin, but these showed clear opposing toe patterns like enormous bare human feet. I photographed everything meticulously before something crashed through the underbrush nearby. Too loud for deer, too rhythmic for bear. I retreated quickly, feeling eyes on my back the entire journey home. The incident reports arrived that evening. Hundreds of documents spanning decades, not just 5 years. Many contained redacted sections, thick black lines obscuring crucial details. Nevertheless, patterns emerged as I sorted through them. Reports of unusual vocalizations mimicking human calls for help, strategically placed deadfalls blocking escape routes, missing hikers who vanished without trace, far more than publicly acknowledged. Multiple ranger requests for transfers after reporting unidentified bipedal wildlife encounters. Most revealing was a psychological assessment of Ranger Kowalski from 2017, who'd worked my exact post before abruptly resigning. The psychologist noted, "Patient exhibits signs of acute stress disorder following prolonged territorial interaction with what he believes is an undocumented species. Patient's description of intelligent predatory behavior suggests either delusion or concerning wildlife development requiring intervention." Attached was Kowalski's personal journal, included as evidence of his deteriorating mental state. I read with growing horror his documented interactions with what he called the Kuskokwim giant. His experiences mirrored mine with frightening accuracy: the silence, the circling, the testing of entrances. His final entry read, "It learns from each encounter, adapts its approach, studies our weaknesses. It's not just hunting, it's researching us." I cross-referenced dates, locations, and incident types, mapping them across my territory. The pattern revealed a central zone with my cabin near its edge, a roughly circular area approximately 20 miles in diameter where most disappearances occurred. As night fell, I secured my findings and prepared for another sleepless vigil. Around midnight, my satellite phone rang. Impossible given the strict protocols limiting its use for emergencies. When I answered, only breathing came through. Deep, rattling breaths, punctuated by what sounded like clicking vocalizations. "Who is this?" I demanded. The breathing stopped. A voice, distorted as if attempting to mimic human speech through an inhuman apparatus, replied, "Neighbor." The line went dead. I tried calling headquarters, but the connection failed repeatedly. I was cut off. Later that night, something heavy landed on my roof. Slow, deliberate footsteps crossed from one end to the other. My ceiling creaked under massive weight as it systematically tested different sections, learning the structure's weaknesses. I clutched my rifle, tracking the movement above until it stopped directly over my bedroom. Minutes passed in terrible silence before a new sound emerged, scratching. Then the unmistakable sound of sniffing at the chimney cap. It was searching for entry points, adapting its strategy. Morning revealed deep impressions in the roof shingles, and most disturbingly, the satellite phone's external antenna had been precisely removed, not damaged. Carefully disassembled as if studied, then purposefully disabled. Whatever hunted me was not just strong, it was methodical, adaptive, and learning about human technology. That day, I reinforced every entrance and prepared defensive positions. If forced to confront this creature, I'd need evidence. I set up trail cameras at strategic points around the cabin and prepared to document whatever visited that night. As dusk approached, I made a desperate radio call to Donovan. The connection was weak, his voice barely audible through static. "Akiak, signal's breaking up." "Something's hunting me," I interrupted. "The same thing that hunted Kowalski and the others. I need extraction. Can't authorize without—" Static swallowed his words. "Evidence. I have evidence. Footprints, photographs, the incident pattern. Not sufficient, need visual confirmation." The radio died completely, leaving me alone as darkness fell. That night, all 5 trail cameras were systematically destroyed. Each memory card was removed and placed in a neat pile on my doorstep, a message that my observer understood their purpose and was deliberately allowing itself to remain undocumented. It didn't want to be seen until it was ready. June brought endless daylight to Alaska, which should have provided relief from nocturnal visitations. Instead, the creature adapted, becoming bolder despite illumination. Massive shadows darted between distant trees during my perimeter checks. Stone cairns appeared overnight, not random piles, but precise arrangements pointing toward my cabin. Most disturbing were the gifts. First came a neatly folded Park Service uniform outside my door, not mine, but too weathered to identify its owner. Next morning brought a shattered camera, matching equipment issued to hikers who'd vanished 3 years ago. The third morning, I found a ranger's badge bent into a perfect circle. Kowalski's, I suspected. Messages, trophies, warnings. My radio remained dead. The satellite phone connected only to static. With each passing day, clouds gathered thicker overhead, promising the summer storm season had arrived. Soon darkness would return with the storms, and with it my visitors' preferred hunting conditions. I needed to act before becoming completely trapped. Using topographical maps, I plotted an evacuation route following ridgelines where I'd maintain visibility of my surroundings. The journey to the nearest outpost would take 3 days of hard hiking, if nothing pursued me. The morning I planned to leave, I awoke to find my cabin surrounded, not by the creature, but by dozens of precisely arranged tree limbs forming a perfect circle 50 feet from my walls. Each branch had been stripped, sharpened at both ends, and driven into the ground at exact intervals, too systematic for animal behavior, a territory marker, a boundary I was being warned not to cross. I spent the day preparing, packing only essentials and ammunition. As afternoon faded toward evening, storm clouds finally broke, unleashing torrential rain. Thunder boomed across the valley, momentarily masking all other sounds, including the heavy footsteps on my porch. 3 deliberate knocks rattled my door. I froze, rifle aimed at the entrance. No animal knocks. This calculated action demonstrated intelligence and understanding of human communication protocols. It wanted me to acknowledge its presence, to open the door voluntarily. I remained silent, barely breathing, as minutes stretched painfully. Then came a sound that chilled my blood. The door handle turned slowly, testing the lock. When it held firm, something massive leaned against the door, wood creaking under enormous pressure. "I know you're inside," a voice growled. Almost human, but fundamentally wrong, like someone learning speech through observation rather than natural development. Each word precisely enunciated, yet utterly alien. The pressure against the door increased until the frame began splintering. I fired a warning shot through the window, shattering glass. Silence followed, broken only by rain and thunder. I positioned myself with clear sight lines to all entrances, waiting for the next approach. Instead, heavy footsteps circled to the rear of the cabin. Metal groaned as the propane tank connected to my generator was wrenched free. The gas hissed briefly before the tank sailed through my kitchen window, rolling across the floor. The message was clear. It could have caused an explosion, but chose controlled destruction instead. This wasn't about killing me quickly. It was about dismantling my defenses methodically. Lightning illuminated the window, revealing a massive silhouette taller than the frame. Not standing on the ground, but perched impossibly on the narrow windowsill, balancing its enormous bulk with unnatural grace. In that brief flash, I glimpsed a broad, sloped forehead, deep-set eyes reflecting red in the lightning, a mouth too wide, filled with teeth designed for tearing, the body covered in dark, matted fur. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second before darkness returned. A low rumble, almost a chuckle, emanated from just outside the broken window. "You see me now," the voice said, closer and clearer. "I've watched you longer." I fired toward the voice, emptying half a magazine through the wall. Wood splintered, glass shattered. When I stopped, only the storm's fury answered. Hours passed in tense silence. False dawn brought enough light to reveal massive footprints circling my cabin, along with gouges in the walls where something had tested structural weaknesses at precise intervals. Engineering analysis, not random destruction. Most disturbing was what I found on my porch. A crude yet recognizable drawing scratched into the wood. A stick figure inside a square. A larger figure outside waiting. Beside it, another square with both figures inside. It wasn't just hunting me. It wanted to capture me, study me, as I had been studying it. The realization crystallized my fear into determination. I couldn't escape and couldn't expect rescue. My only option was confrontation on my terms, not its. I spent the day preparing. If this creature studied humans, learned our technologies and behaviors, then I needed to be unpredictable. I rigged simple but unexpected traps throughout the cabin. Not to kill such a massive predator, but to disorient and confuse it. As darkness fell with the next storm front, I enacted my plan. I scattered personal items outside, creating a trail leading toward the lake rather than the forest. Then I positioned myself in the trees with clear sightlines to the cabin, my rifle equipped with night vision. Hours passed in pounding rain before movement caught my eye. A massive figure emerging from the forest opposite my position. It approached cautiously, circling the cabin twice before investigating my planted trail. Standing upright, it towered over 8 feet tall, its proportions similar to a human, but massively exaggerated. Powerful shoulders and arms hung longer than its torso. The face remained obscured beneath a heavy brow, but intelligence guided its methodical investigation. It examined each item I'd left, studying them with deliberate care before placing them in what appeared to be a crude satchel fashioned from animal hide. This wasn't mindless destruction. It was collection, preservation of human artifacts. When it approached the cabin door, I initiated my diversion, a timer-rigged flare illuminating the night from the opposite shoreline. The creature's head snapped toward the light with predatory focus. It hesitated, looking between the cabin and the flare, visibly processing this unexpected development. After a moment's calculation, it advanced toward the light, moving with shocking speed for its size, transitioning seamlessly between bipedal running and bounding on all fours when necessary. I circled back to the cabin, retrieving my emergency pack. I had perhaps 15 minutes before it discovered the deception. As I turned to escape in the opposite direction, a second set of footsteps splashed through puddles behind me. I wasn't dealing with one creature. I was dealing with a pair. The second creature lunged from the shadows, smaller than the first but still towering over me. I fired instinctively, striking its shoulder. A roar of pain echoed across the lake as it recoiled, more surprised than injured by the impact. I sprinted toward the forest, knowing my only advantage was maneuverability through dense underbrush. Behind me, an answering roar came from the lakeshore, the larger creature abandoning my decoy to race toward its injured companion. They communicated in sharp, clicking vocalizations, coordinating their pursuit with tactical precision. One crashed directly behind me, while the other paralleled my route, attempting to cut off potential escape angles. Hunting strategies requiring abstract spatial reasoning and prediction. Rain lashed my face as I navigated by instinct, pushing deeper into territory I'd never explored. The creatures maintained distance, but never lost track of me, herding rather than capturing. With horrifying clarity, I realized they were steering me in a specific direction, deeper into their territory, away from potential rescue. After an hour of controlled pursuit, I broke through dense forest into a clearing unlike any natural formation I'd documented. Centuries-old trees had been systematically felled and arranged in concentric circles, a constructed space created through generational effort. At its center stood a cave entrance, flanked by stacked stones too precisely placed for natural occurrence. I'd discovered their dwelling, and walked directly into their trap. The creatures closed in from behind, blocking retreat. The smaller one's shoulder still bled from my shot, dark liquid matting its fur. They approached slowly now, no longer needing to rush. The larger one stood upright, rainwater streaming through its thick pelt. In the dim light, I could see its face clearly for the first time, features simultaneously familiar and alien. Eyes set deep under a prominent brow ridge studied me with unmistakable intelligence. Its mouth, wider than a human's with prominent canines, opened slightly. "Stay," it said, the voice I'd heard through my door, but clearer now. Each syllable deliberate, practiced. I raised my rifle. "What are you?" A sound emerged from its throat, not words but something like laughter. "Older than you." The smaller creature circled to my right, moving with purpose toward the cave entrance. I tracked it with my rifle, but the larger one stepped forward, commanding my attention. "Lower weapon," it said. When I didn't comply, it gestured toward the forest behind it. "Others coming." As if summoned by these words, distant vocalizations responded from multiple directions. More than two, more than three, a community. The creature pointed to its companion, then to me. "You harm, we could harm." It touched its chest. "Choose not." The sheer impossibility of this conversation momentarily overwhelmed me. This wasn't just a predator, it was a thinking being attempting cross-species communication. Why did you hunt me? I demanded. The circles around my cabin, the threats? It tilted its massive head. Not hunt, study. It pointed to my ranger badge. You study forest, we study you. A gesture encompassed the woods around us. Our home first. The smaller creature returned from the cave carrying something in its massive hands, a collection of objects I initially couldn't identify. As it approached, I recognized tattered notebooks, weathered identification cards, camera equipment, evidence collected from those who had disappeared. Others before you, the creature continued. Some afraid, attack. It pointed to a scar running along its forearm. Some observe, learn. A gesture toward the collection. Some stay. The implication chilled me more than the rain soaking my clothes. You kept them here? Alive? A sound like stones grinding together emanated from its chest, their version of negation. Choose stay, choose learn. It pointed toward the cave. See. Professional curiosity warred with survival instinct. If I entered that cave, I might never leave. Yet the anthropological significance of what stood before me, a non-human species with language, tool use, and complex social structure, was overwhelming. What happens if I refuse? I asked. The creature considered my question with disturbing human-like contemplation. Territory has boundaries. It pointed toward distant mountains. Beyond mountains, your territory. Here, ours. Its massive hand gestured toward me. You tell others we exist? The question carried obvious implications. My documentation threatened their secrecy, their primary defense against human encroachment. If I promised silence, I ventured. Its eyes, intelligent and evaluating, studied my face. Humans promise, humans forget. It gestured toward the collection again. Those promised too. Lightning illuminated the clearing, revealing what I hadn't noticed before. Crude structures beyond the cave entrance. Not just one dwelling, but many, spanning the hillside and a hidden valley beyond. A settlement invisible from the air, camouflaged from ground observation. How many of you are there? I whispered. Enough, it replied simply. Growing fewer. Humans expand. Something like sadness colored its next words. Soon nowhere left. I lowered my rifle slowly, recognizing the moment's gravity. This wasn't just a cryptid encounter or wilderness survival situation. I stood at a threshold between worlds, between species whose coexistence remained possible only through careful separation. I need to return, I said carefully, to my world. But I'll protect your secret. The creature stepped closer, close enough that I could smell its musky, earthy scent. How? I'll report normal wildlife activity, request transfer citing personal reasons. No documentation of your existence leaves this forest. Its eyes narrowed skeptically. Others searched before, with machines that see heat, fly, and sky. I realized then, government agencies must know something existed here. The redacted reports, the psychological evaluations dismissing eyewitness accounts, a conspiracy not of confirmation, but deliberate obfuscation. They know already, I said. They choose not to confirm. Something like recognition flickered in the creature's expression. Some humans protect boundary, understand balance. It nodded slowly. You become protector. The request wasn't just about my silence, but active protection of their territory, becoming part of a generations-long secret maintained by those who'd encountered these beings before me. Dawn broke through storm clouds as I considered my answer. Pink light illuminated the clearing, revealing details previously hidden in darkness. Crude symbols carved into trees, arrangements of stones marking pathways. Evidence of culture, communication, and community. I'll protect the boundary, I finally answered. But I need something in return. I gestured toward the collection of human artifacts. Evidence of what happened to the missing. Something families can bury. Closure without revelation. The creatures conferred in their clicking language, a rapid exchange I couldn't begin to decode. Finally, the larger one turned back to me. Acceptable exchange. It pointed toward the southern forest. Return journey, 3 days. A massive finger indicated the rough direction. We watch until boundary. Ensure promise kept. As I prepared to depart, the creature extended its hand. An unmistakably human gesture it must have learned through observation. After a moment's hesitation, I reached out. Its palm engulfed mine completely, the skin rough and calloused, yet surprisingly warm. "Name?" it asked suddenly. "Akiak," I replied. "It means brave in Yupik." The creature made a sound deep in its throat, repeating my name with surprising accuracy. Then it touched its own chest. "Ga'atla," it said. The word carried resonances impossible for human vocal cords to produce. Means watcher at edge. The smaller creature approached, depositing several items at my feet. A torn backpack containing personal effects from 3 different missing hikers. DNA evidence. Closure without revealing the truth. I shouldered this burden, both physical and metaphorical, and began my journey back toward human civilization, aware of massive shadows pacing me through the trees, maintaining distance while ensuring I kept my heading toward the boundary line. 3 days later, I reached the ranger outpost. My report cited unusual but identifiable bear activity. My request for transfer mentioned personal reasons, family illness requiring my return south. Before departing, I delivered the recovered items to Donovan. His eyes held mine a moment longer than necessary, as he accepted them without questions. "Not everyone is suited for the deep wilderness," he said carefully. "Some things out there defy classification." "Some boundaries should remain uncrossed," I replied. He nodded slightly, acknowledgement between members of an unspoken fellowship. I left Alaska the following week, carrying knowledge few humans possess. Sometimes at night I still wake thinking I hear those distinctive footsteps circling my house. Not threatening, just checking, making sure the boundary remains intact. The watcher at the edge continues their vigil, and so do I, from my side of the threshold.